Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Yorkshire Gamers, a Reet Big Wargames podcast. And today we reach our diamond anniversary. That's 75 episodes. And the first thing I want to do is to thank you guys and lasses out there who listen to this podcast. It's quite amazing, really, that 4.5 years into this, there's people still listening, there's new people listening, and there's the old grognards who've been there since day one. So thank you, all of you. There have been 185,000 downloads so far, and we're creeping up on 200,000, and we'll be well past that by the end of the year. So thank you once again, everyone, for tuning in. Tell all your mates about it, and let's get as many people as we can listening to this podcast, which will be forever free. That sounds like a 1970s disco hit, that doesn't it? Oh, dear me. The previous episode, Brews of the Vineyard, is extremely popular, as they always are, with Alex and Ian, and the World Cup of Wargaming Pet Hates is still ongoing. I think we're just coming to the end of round two when this show will be released. So all that's going on Facebook. If you've not already, hop over there and get voting for whatever really winds you up in the wargaming hobby. In a fun sense, a few people have taken it a little bit too seriously, but there we go. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I also have just recently put out a YouTube's video on whether I believe that historical wargaming magazines are worth buying, and it's caused a bit of a stir, as I knew it would do, because most people just don't bloody listen to what you say. But there we go. So if you haven't watched it yet, it's on YouTube, and it's very much from the perspective of an old school wargamer. And there's an element of me playing a character and having a bit of fun and having a laugh and a joke. So, those of you who've got upset, I'm shaking my head. You can't hear it, but there we go. Not my intention whatsoever. If you listen to or watch Yorkshire Game, you should know by now. I've been doing this for so long that there's an element of humour in there. So, give it a watch. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of the War Games magazines. I think that it's stirred up quite a good conversation with a lot of people, and a lot of people feel the way that I feel. And if you listen to the Brews in the Vineyard podcast, the last one, we kind of explored it quite a lot with Alex and Ian about the state of the union when it comes to War Games magazines. Anyway, give that a listen. So that comes to today's episode, and it's not negative, but the World Cup and the historical miniatures magazine video kind of live a little bit on the downside. So today we are on the upside. This episode is called Wargaming Positivity, and my guest, Ken Hanning, is the epitome of that. Ken is an old school wargamer. He's got lots of links that are very familiar with me in that he's gone to the Leeds Club. He knows a lot of people that I do. He runs a very successful web page and YouTube channel in relation to his absolutely magnificent Perthshire War Room, which is a purpose-built gaming room in his garden up there in Scotland. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you have a look. It is amazing. I'll put some pictures up on the YouTube version of this just to flick along with it, and you can see every time he puts a picture of it, everyone kind of just goes, "Wow, that is amazing." And we have a chat about that and how he put all that together. He's a big fan of Rapid Fire, and the Richard Marsh and Colin Rumford, the authors of said Rapid Fire, have been on the show before. And then at the end of the show, we talk about something, a difficult subject, I'm going to say, because Ken has been diagnosed with cancer. He has had cancer for some time. He has gone through numerous stages of cancer treatment, and the first 10 or 15 minutes of the last section, it could be difficult for you to listen to because, the lad has had a right time of it, and I'm really glad that he came on to talk about it. Not necessarily, well, definitely not in a negative way, but I wanted those 10 minutes in there just to kind of paint the picture. There'll be people out there listening to this now who have been diagnosed with cancer. There, I am sure, hundreds of you out there who know people have been diagnosed with cancer. And the whole reason of that last section of the podcast was to try and show the absolute level of positivity within this hobby and how Ken has really been helped following his diagnosis by the support of so many people within our hobby, and alongside that, historians and his friends and his wife as well. But there is a real positive vibe within the Wargames hobby, and that's what I wanted to try and get through today during the episode. There's a lot of Yorkshire chat, there's a lot of Leeds chat, there's a lot of food chat, but that's what this podcast is all about by now. You know that. You want an hour dedicated to a wargaming, you listen to WSS or the Lardies. If you want an hour of wargaming split up between me moaning about something, pork pies, fish and chips, best paintbrushes in Skipton, then you know what you've signed up for. And it's bloody free at the end of the day anyway. So sit back, get yourself a cup of tea, and enjoy this really nice chat with Ken Hanning. Without further ado, here's the interview. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 75 of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast, and another milestone along the way as we reach our diamond anniversary. So, I started to think about my previous guests and episodes of what I could do for this special show, and then it hit me. There's clearly not been enough people called Ken on this podcast. There's me every week, but apart from that, on the Brotherhood of Kens, we are very poorly represented on this show. And as you're aware, I like to make sure that diversity is paramount in everything that I do. So, didn't take me long to choose when I decided that, because today's guest is often present on social media showing all of his wonderful Perthshire War Room that we're going to talk about later on. Either through pictures on his big Wargames blog, ticking the box for that name, excellent, like that one, or movies on his YouTube channel of the same name. He loves some big game, does this lad, and some of the videos have had tens of thousands of views or more, which is fantastic to see. One thing I do love about this show is how as we go along and we do more and more of these, there's little links between my guests. And I'm sure we'll explore some of those today with Ken. I've just given the name of my guest away. Oh my God. Or was I just speaking about myself? There you go. Think about that one. But people like Chris Flowers and Colin Rumford might get a mention today. As we say up here, my guest has been through Ringer with his elf over years. So today, at the end of the show, we're going to explore in a positive manner how this hobby has been an absolutely fantastic help and support for my guest through some really trying times. And thank you very much for Ken Hanning, who is my guest. I've given it away now. I've said it twice. And thank you very much for sharing that as we speak about that later on. But more importantly than that, Ken loves a good pie. And that is essential to get on this show. So as always, let's give a big Yorkshire welcome to Ken Hanning. Hello, Ken.
Hello, Ken, and how nice to see you and talk to you.
Yeah, we've met a couple of times in the flesh, haven't we? At Partisan, usually a quick wave right. And a hello.
Yes, that's right. You're usually mobbed by your fanboys and fangirls, so it can be quite hard to get near you.
Especially when I don't know if you heard, but I had to sit down most of the time at the last one because I'm waiting for an operation on my leg, so I can't stand up for a prolonged period of times. So I had to sit there and like have a queue. Next,
I thought you were hiding.
I wish I was. It's like when they do them book signings in Waterstones and people come up one at a time. I felt so embarrassed, but I just couldn't stand up. So there you go. It's one of them things.
What's nice about seeing your games shows, though, Ken, is just the visual spectacle, though. And they're all under a Yorkshire tea influenced banner. So it's the easiest game to find in any venue, I suspect.
Well, that banner is it's absolutely massive, and we've got it on extendable poles. So no matter where they put us in the hall, and we had some trouble at York a few years ago when we were up in the far corner, we just lift the banner higher. So as soon as you walk in, he's over there. The idiot's over there. So yeah, it was great to see you, mate. But before we get chatting, we always have the 4 minute challenge at the start of the program, just so that you could get yourself warmed up talking, and we can get a little bit of a summary of your wargaming past. And we're going to go into more detail of it as we go along the show. So don't worry if you absolutely messed this up, as a number of people have done over the years. But if you'd like to give it your best shot, Ken, I'll press the button now and I'll hold the phone up to the camera when you're coming towards the end. Is that all right, mate?
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely Lovely. Brilliant.
Right, let's go.
Okay, do you know, like a lot of people, I think I started at school. I was trying to think about this when I was getting ready to talk to you. And there was a bunch of us, but we were about 13, 14 years old, used to congregate in different people's fathers' garden sheds and show off our latest Airfix toys. And I'd been given a book by my dad, and I think I must have been 13, called Advanced Wargames by Don Featherstone.
Classic.
And that book became my absolute go-to thing for just personal entertainment. And my mates started reading it. We used to lend it to people. And I even took it to school for a metalwork project, because if you can remember on the cover, on the cover of the book, there are fall of shot indicator circles.
Oh, yes.
And my metalwork teacher asked me if I'd like a project for metalwork. And I said, I'd like to make some fall of shot indicators out of copper rod. And he thought that was a great idea. I took the book along, we worked out the diameters, and we made them. And we ended up making about a dozen sets for my mates as well. And so we all had beautiful Don Featherstone inspired fall of shot indicators in our sheds. These sheds were amazing. Some people, their dads would give them an old dining table, and you'd paint the top of the dining table in green, and so it become your terrain. And then you'd stick a bit of old, we used to use green napkins, paper ones, and put them over books for hills. So that was how it all began for me, and getting the early Airfix sets. You know, you could do all kinds of stuff with early Airfix figures. Military Modelling was such an important magazine because there were always conversion ideas in military modelling. And we never really aspired to the clever stuff, but we did get the idea that you could use the figures for all sorts of things. And, you know, you think of those early sets, Robin Hood, the Sheriff of Nottingham, the Romans, the Ancient Britons, the American Civil War, and then, of course, they launched Napoleonics. I think, first of all, it was just sort of French infantry, cuirassiers, British hussars, and Highlander infantry. But they expanded the range as it went on. So that's really what kicked it off for me. I had loads of mates at school who were really into it. We all had a great time doing that kind of thing. I kind of put that on the back burner then when I was a student in Cardiff, doing postgrad studies. But my dad became ill, so I had to come back to Leeds. And Leeds was an amazing place to come back to in the sort of mid-1980s, because I met this guy, Steve Sykes, and I met him in Headingley Library. Do you remember, Ken, the days when libraries had Wargame sections?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, amazing. And I was standing in the Wargame section reading Charles Senior Grant's Napoleonic Wargame book and looking at the colour pictures, because colour images of Wargames were very rare in those days. It was a black and white world in the published world. And Steve wandered up to me and said, "Oh, your Wargames?" I said, "Yes." So am I. So Steve introduced me to the Leeds Wargames Club, where I met John Smith and Steve Shan and others who were around at that time. John Sharples came along, and I used to go up to the Alexandra Working Men's Club in Armley. We'd play some great games. And then with Steve, we got into the shows, because with my first job in Leeds, I had a car, a Nissan Sunny Estate.
Ooh.
Perfect for attending Wargame shows. And it had a rear window you could open in case you had a dog in the back. It's the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. And so we used to go to all those shows that were really for us, the annual calendar setter. You know, you went to Triples in Sheffield at the old Octagon Centre, and you'd see Duncan McFarlane, and Dave Millwood and all, lots of war games and things. Ken Trotton and his daughter doing the book stand. You go down to the assembly rooms in Derby, another great venue for a show. Go up to the Beverley Museum of Army Transport, as it was.
Yes,
Used to be a
remember that
show
one?
there.
Remember that one?
Yeah, Red Car Bowls, so named because it was a square building. Never worked that one out. We used to go to Stockton-on-Tees. And then also we went to a place called Allenwell in the West Midlands, which I only knew of because of war games. So that was where, again, we met up with a guy called Dave Millwood and Simon Norton and Tony Barton. Tony Barton was a figures designer who was a mate of Steve's from university days. So I remember getting off a train at Sheffield Station once, queuing up for a taxi, and this bloke tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, I'm on my way to the show. I'll pay for the taxi if you share it with me." And it was Tony Barton. So we had a nice chat about. He just launched the Battle Honors range at that time of 50mm Napoleonics. I started buying a lot of those. And I was really a 50mm Napoleonic wargamer for a long time. And then got into modern stuff in the mid-1990s when Rapid Fire was launched. And rapid fire war games have been the sort of the defining rules of my life. I embrace all kinds of rules. I'm not one of these rules zealots. I love the stuff that Two Fat Lardies do. Chain of Command I've played. I like rules from books, the early books in particular. Charles Grant's the war game rules, which his son Charles S. Grant has updated. So that was a big moment for me. Then work intervened. I was a 50mm war gamer from time to time. But it all re-kicked off again in 2016. I lost my great friend Steve Seitz when he died of esophageal cancer, which was just an awful time. He was such a great influence on me and such a great friend. And we'd invented a way of playing war games throughout his illness using the iPad and FaceTime.
Oh,
and
wow.
I did a 3-foot square table in squares like the Neil Thomas 1 hour war games type setup. And we'd play little games on those twice a week over the iPad, which was great fun. And then Steve moved up to be near to us for a few weeks before he died because he got better treatment at Airedale than he was getting in Hereford, and that was on the recommendation of the Hereford. But then he died, and at the funeral, which was a wonderful event, I met a few old wargaming chums. Dave Millwood, Steve's wife Jane was there, obviously. And I met John Smith. It was John who did the next big thing in my wargaming history, which was introduced me to Chris Flowers. I went along to Chrissy's wargaming barn and nearly collapsed in shock at the racks of figures. I mean, you've been there actually. You know,
it's an amazing place.
It's
amazing
extraordinary.
place.
22,000 28mm Napoleonics, all painted, in my view, to museum standard. They're just extraordinary. Brilliant. And Chris was incredibly generous. Let me come along to lots of games on his his huge table. I think it's 17 feet by 6 feet and a bit. And we would play, I was used to playing rapid fire and squeezing a brigade onto a 6x4 or an 8x5 table. Chris deployed multiple brigades. He had a full division of rapid fire scale airborne troops. And we would play these enormous Peter Gilder-esque Grand Manner Napoleonic games. I remember once being in charge of a Russian artillery battery and making Richard Harris's life very, very unpleasant because he couldn't do anything to get past them. And what was even more depressing was I didn't know much about Napoleonic wargaming at that stage. So I think he was really cheesed up for that. So, yeah, I mean, wargaming's been the kind of a backdrop to keeping me happy throughout my life. I mean, other people, for example, my wife, will say they've played a big role as well. But, wargaming's been a really, really seminal thing for me. And I moved to Scotland in 2019. We came up to look after my wife's parents, and so I wasn't able to play at Chrissy's big table anymore. And that was when I launched my YouTube channel, Bit Wargames, which has now got 1,500 subscribers. One of the videos been watched by, I think it's 16 or 17,000 people. And I've had lots of lovely contact from wargamers all over the world. A guy in Delaware in the States called Guy DeLilio got in touch with me. We chat probably once a month on a video chat now about wargaming and model making. He's a very good model maker. Wrote a very good book on building models for the RMM campaign. And he made me, when he saw I was doing the Operation Torch, Safi from one of the very first rapid fire, which is the Great Cigars, he made me an escort carrier and cardboard and posted it to me.
Fantastic.
It's a 20mm wargaming scale. It's the biggest thing on the table. It's over 2 feet long, and it's hilarious. My table's only 12 by 6, but it gives me the chance to put on much bigger wargames than I used to be able to do. And I was inspired by those early rapid fire scenarios because, that was the world of colour. As I said earlier, up until then, the Wargames newsletter, the books, even Battle and the Dawn Festival books, they were all slightly fuzzy black and white images.
Yeah.
Colin and Richard ramped up the standard after that point. And of course, a lot had been done also by Duncan with Miniature Wargames, the very first run of that magazine. I mean, I used to help, I used to help carry Duncan's stuff in at Fiasco from his camper van. And, he used to bring every publication you could imagine and then leave you to do things. Well, he went off around photographing all the various shows, but he had great lighting and a superb camera. And he really brought Wargames life, particularly Peter Gilder's table. I sometimes think Peter Gilder doesn't get the recognition he deserves amongst Wargames because those early images were inspirational. I never got to go to the Wargames Audio Centre, but I saw him on Yorkshire TV with Edward Woodward.
Yeah.
And he used to put on the most amazing games in the Wargames magazines. So fantastic.
Peter definitely gets the recognition he deserves on this show.
Right.
He's, I mean, I've done a Peter Gilder special with Robbie Roddis a long time ago now.
Right.
But yeah, he is one of the people that you've mentioned there, like Duncan and Don Featherstone, that are just the heroes of wargaming for the likes of you and me. And I'm so keen in this modern day world of chicken jousting and all the other stuff that's going on to just kind of leave that sort of stuff to the magazines and to other podcasts and me to just leave a memory about these people who were so influential to us all. But yeah, you've gone well over 4 minutes, Ken. But I didn't stop you because you were on a roll, so I didn't stop you.
Well, I didn't write anything down because I just wanted to say it.
Yeah, no worries, mate. But there's lots of things there for us to kind of dip into on this first section of the show. And the first thing I've got to ask really is, have you still got the rings that you made in metalwork?
No, I haven't, and I haven't got them for a very good reason. One of my friends went off to join the forces and took a tiny little sort of Wargame set with him, and he didn't have a fall of shot indicator. So I gave them to him as a kind of cheerio mate present. So I imagine they're possibly somewhere in the Fleet Air Arm at Yulverton, but I'm not absolutely sure.
Oh, right. Well, if anyone knows where Ken's full of shot markers are, please let us know because we'd love to see them on the show. And you said, I can't remember whether it was earlier on before I started recording, but you were brought up in the Leeds area around Cookridge.
That's right. I was born in Scotland, in Port Glasgow, the posh end of Port Glasgow. And for anyone who knows Port Glasgow, knows that's a lie. 3 years old, I got moved to Edinburgh. My dad was a civil engineer. As you know, in Scotland, you're either an engineer or a singer of strange music. So my dad was an engineer, worked on the Forth Road Bridge. He specialised in sort of expansion joints and motorway bridges. And then he got moved down to Yorkshire with the Department of Transport. We moved to Leeds, and he was responsible for the Tinsley Viaduct in South Yorkshire.
Classic.
I know. And so we lived in Cookridge in Leeds, and really interesting thing about in that part of Leeds was all my friends were Wargames, which was great. And my great Wargame show at that time was a guy called Chris Lorna. Chris was a very big influence because Chris lived in a detached house.
Oh, nice.
And Chris had a playroom.
Oh, posh.
So you could leave a Wargame set up in it.
Oh.
And also just at Crossroads in Horsforth, which we could cycle to on our bikes, was a great model shop. People from Leeds might know called Models and Militaria, just at the start of the end of Town Street. And so you used to go there every week with your pocket money to find out what was new. I can still remember getting my first Matilda Airfix tank in a bubble pack because it had the Corner camo scheme. And I was really fascinated by that. And he had a small line of books. And that was when I first came across the name Charles Grant. And I've had the great pleasure recently in carrying a club of playing a couple of war games with Charles S. Grant. And what an absolutely charming gentleman and fabulous advert for the hobby he is, not just in his prolific publishing, but in the way he conducts himself. I like to play war games with what I call kindred wargame spirits. So I'm not interested in rules lawyers and people who want to win at all costs. I want to have a nice experience, really enjoy myself.
Yeah, definitely.
And the people I've played with over the years, Steve Sykes, Chris Flowers, Charles Grant, just off that ilk, They just want to enjoy it. They just want to have a lovely time, and that makes for great fun. So yeah, I was brought up in Leeds, and I know North Leeds particularly extremely well because I didn't leave. I went to Leeds Polytechnic where I got a degree in town planning, and then went down to Cardiff to do postgrad studies. So I was in Leeds until my early 20s.
Hmm.
A
And you
great
meant,
place to be.
yeah, yeah, fun. It is. It's a city that I came to in the 1980s and stayed. Mostly because me and my wife couldn't agree. She's Welsh, and we couldn't agree where to live, so we just stayed where we were. It was either Cheshire or Wales, and we couldn't agree to go to the opposing partner's area, home area. So we stayed in Leeds, and we've been here ever since. And another thing you mentioned, which is you know, maybe people these days don't have the same experience, but the value of libraries back in our time was just amazing. You could, I mean, Northwich Library, which is where I grew up. You could literally go in, and there's like two shelves full of war games
Yeah,
books.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. That big thing, but a very big thing, and also in our school. At
mm,
one point, I went to Leeds Boys Modern School in Leeds, which is now called Lawnswood School. It's on the Ring Road roundabout. And we had very famous ex-pupils. Alan Bennett was an ex-pupil.
oh,
He used to
mm.
write a letter to the headmaster, Mr. Holland, Cheesy Holland, every year. Um, John Craven of John Craven's Newsround, another
Oh
ex-pupil.
yes, I
And a
remember
guy
that.
called Bob Peck, who's an
Mm.
actor, sadly died of cancer, but he was in Edge of Darkness, a really dark BBC thriller
Oh yes,
about
yes, I remember that. Yeah,
nuclear material. So it was a great.
Eric Clapton did the soundtrack.
It did absolutely, and the reason I mentioned the school is we had a history teacher there called Mr. McNeil, who was known as
Mm.
Pussy McNeil because he used to hit you with desk lids. He used to go around the room hitting people with lids off desks if they weren't
Yeah.
behaving. And he was like, have you seen the film Kes?
Yes. Yeah.
You know the part Brian Glover plays, the bullying
Yes.
sports teacher. Well, Miss
Yeah.
Pussy McNeil was the bullying history teacher
History teacher.
who taught us about history battles with war games, but his rule set always insisted that he won.
Yes.
And it was just he'd get this
It's a
floppy bit of hardboard out, and he'd put out these ACW figures saying, right, today we're doing Gettysburg, boys. Hanning, you can be the losers. Because he knew I liked walking. He'd actually call my side the losers. And
oh,
then,
brilliant.
but he was a great character. And that's where a lot of us really got into wargame, thanks to Pussy McNeil, because it was really into and
Oh, that's fantastic.
terrible bully.
And that's where you said you met Steve Sykes in the library.
Met Steve Sykes in the library. We were in Headingley Library, which is a great little library, and it had this section. I think it was about two shelves of war games books tucked away. And I wandered in, and I was interested in starting a new period. Actually, I'd come back to Leeds, so I was looking through these books, and Steve just tapped me on the shoulder. And he wasn't a very outgoing person. He was very studious, very, very clever man. We used to
Mm.
go to the pub quiz at the Three Horseshoes in Headingley. People left as they saw Steve arriving, which was
Here's the
brilliant.
ringer.
Oh, absolutely. So Steve said, "Are you into wargaming that?" And he invited me back to his house, which was in Meanwood, back to back in Meanwood. And he had a fantastic collection of mainly 15mm ancients that he'd painted himself. And he was a founding member of the Society of Ancients. Big pal of Phil Barker and Paddy Griffith. If he found something in the rules that he didn't particularly approve of or thought was going wrong from the WRG Ancients rules, he'd ring Phil up on a weekend and have a discussion with him about it. Phil would be saying, "No, I'm having my lunch, Steve." Yeah, but yeah.
No, we need
And
to talk about this rule. Never mind your lunch. We need to
absolutely.
talk
And
about this.
Steve was a really witty wargamer. He loved a good giggle about wargaming. He once got fond of. He was a really bright computer guy. He maintained the mainframe from British Gas's customer service, and he wrote everything in machine code, not in software.
Mm.
So he'd every now and then he'd get buzzed on his bleeper on Sunday when we were walking, because we wargamed every Sunday.
Mm.
And somebody would say to him, and he'd answer the question, and then he would say, "I had to give them a new password." He said, "I've devised all the passwords to be completely hack-free." He said, "All the passwords for British Gas I've devised are Roman generals." He said, "But,"
Ah,
he said, "in order to confuse hackers, Ken," he says, "I haven't
yeah.
used them in chronological order."
Oh, brilliant.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Just, And that was the way
Oh,
his brain worked. And so yeah, we used to go up to the club, and I'd often have one of the books from the library with me because libraries were such a massive resource, and I worry about libraries nowadays. My wife retired recently, and they had a new trainee working with them in their financial services firm, and he was doing a degree as well as being a trainee in financial
mm.
services. And he once came into their tea room and he said to them, he said, "You know, the university, there's that room with all the books in it." And Morris said, "Yes." He said, "What do people use those for?" He had no concept. Did everything online. He had no
Yeah.
concept of library. And I worry about that because there's something nice about having a physical object in your hand and looking at the pictures. I know you can do it all online, but there's something,
Mm.
something, I don't know, just nice, tactile about having a book,
Yeah.
I think.
I think that feeling when you are researching something new or maybe
Yeah.
looking at a uniform or whatever, when you sat at a desk and you've got 5 or 6 books open and you're trying to work out which one's right or which one you're going to use, and that feeling of moving the books around. I mean, I'll tell it again because it's one of my favourite stories. But the Uniforms of Waterloo by Philip J. Haythornwaite came into our school library when I was in my third year, and I took it out and I kept it on permanent loan for 3 years until my final year. And I went into the library and saw the librarian and said, "Look, can I just buy this? Can I just buy this book because I've had it for 3 years?" And and he said, no word of a lie. He said, "Just fuck off, Riley, and put it in your bag." Uh, so
That's brilliant.
I've still got it upstairs. And then it's only years later. I think it was during the podcast that I spoke to my old friend Steve Barker. And one of our mutual friends was desperately trying to take that book out of the library, and he was so annoyed with me because I'd always got it on low.
And, you know
Uh,
that's so brilliant. But I think there's also an important point about the future of the hobby and about research about books, which is that historians and wargame tradespeople earn more from a book than they do from a snippet of an online presence. And you know, people. I'm a massive reader of military history, and all these great historians we have. You know, James Hollands, Peter Caddick Adams, but you know, David Chandler going back and Richard Owens and all these people. Where would we be without those books, without that research? And how could they have done it without a publishing contract? And I know they don't earn lots of money from books. You'd be shocked at how little they earn, but it's still part of their kit bag of earnings that allows them to carry on doing that research. And you know, our hobby is so dependent on great people in the trade environment. I remember once being at Triples and I passed Duncan McFarlane, and he was bright red, absolutely furious. And the reason was, on a stand near him, someone had been selling some period figures, and someone had stolen an entire row of little bubble packs, stolen them
mm,
during the show. And
mm,
Duncan was just raging, saying, "No, that's that guy's profit for today. Gone to start with."
mm,
And
yeah,
we need all these tradespeople, the rules writers, the figure makers, the terrain makers, the writers of books and research and history. You know, we need all these people to really support our people. I mean, somebody I didn't mention other than saying I bumped into when I was first at Leeds Club was Steve Shan. Oh, you know,
yeah.
Steve's done masses for the hobby with his research and his publications. Apart from his lifelong commitment to painting the Chris Flowers collection, you know, he's also produced some great publications.
Yeah, he's a lovely lad as well. Lovely lad. Yeah, that's so. Apologies to other listeners because this is going to turn into a bit of a Leeds Wargames club memories here. But how did you first come across Leeds Wargames Club? I don't know whether I've told this before, but I was a student at Leeds University, and I'm sat in me tiny little student digs, and I'm reading a copy of miniature war games. It would have been at
Yeah,
that time,
yeah,
talking 1988. And in the back was a little advert, a little 4 or 5 lines. Leeds Wargames Club looking for new members. Please call John Smith on this number. Um, and as I've said on previous shows, this is perfect setup for a serial killer. You ring the number, you go to this address, and then you never see it again. But anyway, that didn't happen because I'm still here. Uh, so
Do
I
you know
rang.
what? John could have done the scenes of crime photographs.
He could have done, yeah, he could have done. So I rang him up and I found out where it was, and I was in Headingley at the time, so it wasn't far away for me to walk. I didn't have a car or anything at the time, and here I am, all those years later, still involved. So what? How did you find Leeds War Games Club?
Well, it was down to Steve Sykes again. After being chatting the library, I played a couple of war games at his house with him. He had a very nice setup. We used to do mainly Ancients games, which he was very fond of, and which he was incredibly knows about. And then he said he was going to get the bus up to the Leeds War Games Club at Armley, at the Alexandra. Did I want to go with him? Because there was a bus that went from Headingley cross country up to Armley. And I said, well, I've got my car. I'll drive us up. So he drove up and went in downstairs, grabbed a pint, went upstairs to the club. And I have to say, I found it very, very friendly. A lot of really nice people there. John was there. Steve Sham was there. There was a guy called Andy, a shortish bloke. Met
Andy
lots of
Scott. Andy Scott.
that would be it, yep. And I met lots of really nice people. I say he was there as well, Drew Briggs. Do you remember Andrew Briggs?
Name rings a bell.
Yeah, he was an Ancients wargamer. I knew him through financial services later in life as well as being at the club. But what was fascinating about Drew was his wife painted the shields for him. She was an absolutely beautiful. She could be a great miniatures painter. She painted all the shields for me. He always had the most beautiful shields. So I got to play periods I wasn't particularly into and didn't have a collection for. That's the great thing about club, even in this day, particularly for youngsters, is you can get access to grand scale wargaming just by being invited to take part. And it was great fun. There was a guy who did an amazing Northern Ireland game about the Troubles with these RUC officers with massive hats. Land Rovers whizzing all over the place and things exploding and stuff. There was another guy who used to do naval stuff. There were quite a few ancient wargamers, definitely a lot of Napoleonic guys, and then there were a few more modern ones who were in the rapid fire circuit. So yeah, it was a great club to me. So it was all thanks to Steve that I went along.
And I think it's a good advert. People listen to this. I know they do who don't belong to a club and maybe game at home on their own. And if you can get into a really good club, it makes such a massive difference to
Yeah.
your wargaming life. And a lot of those people that you've mentioned there are still my friends today. Whereas people I was at school with and I've worked with over the years in some pretty hairy situations. I don't talk
Yes,
to them anymore, but I still talk to all the people that I met when I went to Leeds War
yeah.
Games Club. So
It's
fantastic thing, War
it
Games Club.
is, and when you go to a show, even today, and Partisan's a great example. You'll still bump into people from the old days that you knew when you were beginning to get into wargaming, and that's a great experience when you can have a chat. I met Bill Gaskin at the last Partisan, admiring that big castle model that he'd made and talking to him about it. And I never met Bill before, and I had the most wonderful conversation. The number of common links that we had
Mm.
in the diaspora of wargaming was amazing. I think clubs are enhanced nowadays by the whole social media thing. I've met lots of people via Facebook groups and Twitter who I'm very pleased to have met. And I've met someone in the flesh afterwards, Henry Hyde, for example.
Yeah,
Great
lovely guy.
example. Super, super guy. Used to interact with him on Twitter and then bumped into him at Partisan 2 years ago. And just delightful guy to spend a bit of time with. What a great servant to our hobby. And again, a great publisher and a great user of modern digital media, a bit of a pioneer on that. Other guys I've met a lot of rapid fire war games who do other things. You mustn't think I'm just a rapid fire zealot. I do other stuff, but I've met guys called Dawn McHugh and Alan McCoubry via Facebook, etc., who've been really helpful with with thoughts about how to do things differently with the hobby and how to use different models, etc. And from time to time, I've sent me the old models. So look, you might find this useful for your RNEP kit, whatever. It's a very collegiate hobby. It's a very supportive hobby of people. So when you're in a club, you're much more likely to come across that kind of collegiate approach, I think.
Yeah. I enjoy. I've got quite a nice relationship with Henry now. I've done a couple of podcasts with him, and I did the mental health podcast with him, which was one of the most important things I think I've
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
And he's always so nice. He's like, oh, lovely to speak to you again, Ken.
yes,
And it's like, no, Henry, it's lovely to speak to you,
yes,
mate.
yes,
I'm just some
absolutely.
stupid northern bloke who swears and shouts a lot on a podcast, and you're a hobby legend. So
Yes,
yeah, it's fantastic to have people like that. I was so approachable
absolutely.
in the hobby. Um, can you go back in time? We've spoke a lot about wargaming. We've touched on history a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But can you go back and sort of find a moment or something that influenced your love of history? Did you have somebody in the military in your family, or where did it come from?
Uh, that's a really interesting question. It came out of frustration with
Right.
the Leeds Education Board. When I was at school, getting ready for my O levels, I used to love reading history and geography. They were my two big things. And I was told I was getting ready for my O levels. You can only do geography or history because you also have a science and you also have to do
Oh,
English.
yeah, I
It's
remember
actually,
those days.
yeah, yeah. So my geography teacher said, look, you're bloody good at geography. And of course, I ended up doing a degree in town planning. So he's probably right.
Mm.
But I'm so fascinated by history. I can almost remember sitting in my bedroom home, sharing with my brother and thinking, I'm going to carry on doing history. They're not going to stop me. So there was that kind of obstinate teenage kid thing that kicked in. I just said, no, I'm not stopping doing history. And that was when I really started bringing books home from the library, or stuff I didn't need to do. So I would get, and that's why Wargame is so important, because I was interested in the history of Napoleon. I was really only interested in Waterloo as a kid. And I remember my dad took me to see the film and just blown away by it, And, my idea of Waterloo in those days was a couple of airfix units of French infantry, a unit of cuirassiers, a bit of artillery, something similar on the other side, 2 foot by 2 foot table, off you go.
Yeah.
But the history began to teach me that things work differently, that these alleged regiments of infantry had different units within them, and they wore different colours on their hats. And the history really began to make it more interesting. And to this day, I suffer now with low vision, so I have to use various aids and things to read. But to this day, history books are my go-to. We have a mobile library that comes to our village in Perthshire every 3 weeks. And Omar, the man who brings it, who's a fascinating character, he's got a Sudanese father and a Perthshire mother, and he's been brought up in Dundee all his life. He doesn't like Sudan. He thinks Sudan is too disorganised. It's absolutely hilarious talking to him.
And he comes from Dundee.
And he comes from Perth. He comes from Perth.
All right, that's all right then.
Yeah,
I'm going to say Dundee's
I know.
disorganised.
But he brings this library in, and he's always looking for new additions to the military history range that he can then put on the van for me. So, this has really been a lifelong passion for me. And I've met a few historians now over the years and enjoyed that company. And it means that, and we'll get back to this in Room 101 actually, because I don't think you can wargame an historical period without understanding the historical period. I really think that's just so critical. So well, we'll come on to that in Room 101.
Yeah.
And I get asked questions sometimes on the YouTube channel, and you read it and you think, is this that time when I'll say buy a book or borrow a book, or do I just back off from this conversation? Because it's what we're trying to do with historical war games. Have a great time, have a great war game, enjoy ourselves. No one's going to die, so it's great. But also try and do something reasonably historical and the approximation. I've got my big Arnhem project on the moment to create on a 12-foot long table a terrain that Colin Rutherford took 21 feet to do. I'm still telling you, he struggled with bits of it. But, it's beginning to shape up quite well. And I was watching a World War II Walking the Ground YouTube video with Al Murray and James Holland, where they were walking a particularly critical part of the battleground, which goes from the St. Elizabeth's Hospital up to the museum. And I learned so much about what I needed to make sure I got right in the terrain. Because originally I thought I might just do it flat. I might not bother with a 3D neutral. It's easy to do it flat. But that would have ruined the battle. That would have made the battle pointless. And it's things like that you need to understand the history really well. And so, and I think also good historians bring history alive. And history for me isn't just about important kings winning important battles. It's about what's life like for the squaddy stuck in that trench or in his slit trench or in his foxhole. What was life like for the bloke driving the wagon that brought the ammunition or the food or the fuel? You know, how did this? James Holland always goes on about a modern army is like a big pyramid, and the fighting bit is the tiny bit at the top of the pyramid. But actually, it only gets there because of the bulk underneath it, which is factories and production facilities and logistics and everything else. And, you know, for every guy on the front line, you need lots of guys in the background pushing stuff forwards. So I like to understand that. The parts of Arnhem that also interest me is how they got stuff up that road, you know, after the Germans were removed, how they got all that stuff up that tiny road to make sure that there was enough fuel and ammunition and food for the troops in the front line. That's something we don't always take account of in wargaming, but it's something that if you're going to do campaign wargaming, Henry Hyde's written a brilliant book about campaigns. If you're going to do campaign wargaming, I think that should really come into play because that's what will make or break a campaign. We'll use any period in history to see that. So for me, history, out of sheer obstinacy, became the passionate route of my life.
Brilliant. And you said something really interesting there during your little talk there, and that was you went home and you did stuff that you didn't need to do.
Yes.
So I really like that saying. I really like that because, we'll have all gone to school with people who are just not interested in learning. Maybe they're people who are best with hands-on skills and stuff like that. So it's not a criticism of them, but there are a group of people, and many of them become war gamers. I think it's a trait that a lot of us have of that wanting to learn more above and beyond what you need to do to get a pass in your exam. And I think that was a really nice thing you said, Ken. And I kind of thought, oh yeah, I do that as well.
I honestly think that's why it was such a seminal moment for me. I'm really pleased you asked that question about how because I don't think about it very often. But it was the first time in my life I made a volunteer choice to study something. And it's been really important for my entire life that I made that choice.
Yeah,
and it has to be your choice, but it was really important for me. It's funny how it happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned, as we go along, I'm scribbling things down and then crossing them off and what have you. And you mentioned Dave Millwood and
Simon Norburn.
Simon Norburn.
Yeah.
Now, my memories of Dave and Simon, and I was in contact with Simon a couple of years ago, but I've lost contact with him because Dave was really poorly. I don't know.
Dave died, unfortunately.
Did he? Did he? Oh, it was. He was. I think he was in hospital, and I was talking to Simon. But my memories of them, and these are fond memories, was that they had their computer wargaming, the English computer wargaming, and they would set up for a 2-day show, and it would all start fantastically. And then something would go wrong with the computer, and then everyone else around the table would just get more and more drunk as they would go into the bar because there was nothing happening with the game because Dave was trying to fix the computer, and it just degenerated into this huge argument on a Sunday afternoon about why it wasn't working. But there's so much fond memories.
Great characters. You mentioned the beer. I remember turning up at Triples once with Steve Sykes, and we went into the Octagon bit. We said hello to Duncan, and Peter Pig guy was there with his wife. Said hello to Tom Trotman's daughter, who was whizzing boots out right left to centre. We watched. I think we always used to seek out the Sods display game because these Sods war games were the same standard of terrain that you saw in the magazines. And I didn't know Chris Flowers at that point. but I knew I liked those games, and I knew that. And Swords was always in a prime position in the Octagon sector, right in the middle. So we'd do our round of there, see if there's anything new in the trade rooms, and then we'd. If you remember at the Octagon, you went downstairs, back into the reception, and then up the stairs and off into a set of squared off buildings, where this is sort of the participation games. Where the competition and demonstration games were, and more trade. And Dave and Simon were always at the far end. And Steve and I wandered up one day, so it had been mid-morning by this point. And as we arrived, Dave said, the computer's absolutely trashed. And this was early morning on a Saturday, the first day of triples. And he reached under his table and produced 2 pints of bitter. He said, I've got a few of these now. He said, we're going to need them. We actually got presented with 2 pints of bitter as walking up to the table. It's one of the best Wargames moments I've ever seen. It's hilarious.
Oh, fantastic! And you've just brought a memory back to me there, actually, Ken. Is coming across from Octagon into those other rooms. You went through like a glass framed passageway.
Yeah, it was like a connecting tunnel or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always remember on the very rare occasions that the sun shone in Sheffield that you would come out of the Octagon, which was nice and cool, and then you would
Yes.
go into that glass corridor
Yes.
that was the temperature of the middle of the sun,
Yes.
and then come out of the other side into like fresh air. It was like a rite of passage to be
Yes.
burnt in the triples corridor.
But the shows and triples is a really good example. First of all, and you mentioned something I didn't pick up on, I should have picked up on. Triples was a 2-day show.
It was, yeah.
And that was brilliant because in the evening there was a quiz, if you remember, in the pub and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And a great 2-day show. And you'd meet these lovely wargamers out. Just had a memory of another one actually, Ian Beck. Do you remember Ian Beck?
Yeah, yeah.
Ian Beck was from, I'm going to say Halifax, might be in Huddersfield, but I think it was Halifax. And I remember he put on an amazing participation game called Pony Wars. It was the most beautiful game. They had, the premise of it was a bunch of cavalry guys had to get out and beat the Indians up before they killed all the settlers or the miners or the farmers, or whoever it might be. They were all tucked around on this great terrain. And Ian was a wonderful pioneer of these kind of games and that kind of participation level. I mean, tragically, he was killed in a car crash not long after that, actually. But he was a wonderful guy to go and chat to because he loved introducing people to the hobby and getting enthused about it. And there are a few people like that around who really made an effort as a host of a participant game to draw people in. Kids loved that game. That was a great game for youngsters. And I tell you, the other standbys, now, I hesitate to mention this name, so if you need to take your headphones off at this point, I'll give you an early warning. There was obviously the guy from Lancashire Games who was there.
Whoa, whoa,
I know.
whoa.
Who used to be good at producing little terrain pieces and felt cloths and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, but we'll move on from that unsavoury note to the conversation.
Yes, we will.
There was the Colour Party, Pates people from Leeds and all these guys. So there was a lot of people that you bumped into every year. And I say, I'm still in touch with Sam and Norbert, actually. We message from time to time, catch up and stuff.
Nice.
And he's always been a great servant of the hobby, as was Dave. Dave Millwood was a wonderful wargamer, very inventive, a real pioneer of computer stuff, even though I don't think, to my certain knowledge, it ever worked. He was a pioneer of it.
Yeah, we used to use it quite often,
Right.
and we had a computer called the Atari ST.
Yes.
And it worked wonderfully on that. It was
Right.
absolutely brilliant. The problem occurred when it went across to the early PCs,
Right.
and it never worked on there, and it would always like crash at 4 o'clock on the first day of a 3-day game and lose all the data. So we kind of stopped using it. But that's something that Dave kind of pioneered, but it's never really been pushed forward to the level that I thought it would. We've got things like Carnage and Glory in the States, and we had Eagle Bearer was another one, if I remember correctly. But those computer-aided systems don't seem to have come as far in technology-wise as everything else has in the hobby.
I think, to be honest, I suspect if people want to use computers for wargaming, they'll do computer wargaming. So they'll do the video game side of it. I think, I am a big believer in making wargaming easy. And because of my low vision, I struggle now with charts and tables. So that's why I'm a big adopter of the rapid fire reloaded rules, because they don't use charts and tables. So it's dead easy, very, very intuitive to use. I was chatting with Nick of the Two Fat Lardies at Partisan last time about rules and stuff like that. I am a massive fan of their inventiveness and the approach that they take to the hobby, and how much they serve and draw people into the hobby. Their whole spreading the lard thing, which is a revolting concept.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, what fantastic servants to our hobby they have been, and how inclusive they are.
Yeah, I'm because of the type of games I play, quite large games. I don't play many of their rules, but they do get, and I do think they're absolutely marvelous in what they do, and they do always get a positive spin on this program. And I'm still waiting for me money, Rich, for doing that. If
It's
quick
interesting you
fiver
say
here
about
and there.
the rules. I tend not to use them because they tend to be for smaller tables and smaller numbers of
Yeah, that's
forces,
what I have.
which
Yeah,
actually suits a lot of people in modern houses with small
yeah,
rooms.
yeah,
It's perfectly sensible. I've got an enormous room out in my back garden that I could leave stuff up in. If I was trying to do that in the house, my wife would be hoovering things up as I was laying them down, and I wouldn't see them. I wouldn't see them again. They'd be in the vac bag and then the bin. So it's easy to enjoy a big war game if you've got the space, and that's where clubs can really come into their own as well as shows. But if you're living in a modern house with a family, with the kind of rooms that developers are building nowadays, I kind of think that a lot of stuff that Two Fat Lardies did is really bespokely done for that environment, and really appropriate and very inventive for it as well, because it makes it interesting. I have played Chain of Command and enjoyed it, but I like brigade stroke divisional size characters with lots of figures running into each other. Not so much armor, just mainly things.
yeah. No, and all praise to them for
Yeah,
everything they do
absolutely.
for the hobby. The second best wargaming podcast they've got.
Well, don't they call theirs an oddcast?
Oddcast, yeah, definitely. We're gonna talk about Perthshire and the move up
Yeah.
there in the next section. But I just kind of want to fill that gap in between the Leeds. So when did you leave Leeds then?
So it's a complicated story because I've left Leeds twice.
Right.
So and at this point I should go Leeds, but I'm not going to, because it'll upset Bradford people in the room. But I know. I thought so. Well, you just wait until we get to the quiz. Unless you don't ask that question.
Another one started on -5.
But I did leave in 1981 to go off and do postgraduate studies in Cardiff. Then I came back in 1984/5. That's when I joined the Leeds Club. I was very busy in the Leeds Club, and then work took over. So I would guess from the late 1990s, I was pretty low level in the wargaming focus career and everything. I was getting promoted and enjoying the money, and there was a lot of pressure, as you know yourself, in the working environment. People insist on you performing to certain key performance indicators, which I've always detested. They make unpleasant comments about potential redundancy if you don't agree with them. So get on with it. So I didn't really come back to Leeds after I was into financial services. I stayed in financial services a long time, but I got divorced in 2001 from my first wife, and at that point, I'd been given a different role, so I needed to move. So I moved to Hellyfield in Yorkshire. So I left Leeds for the last time in 2001. At that point, I was living in Auckland, moved out to Hellyfield, and Hellyfield was again just work. So I didn't really get involved in wargaming proper until around that time of Steve's death, and I started to hooking up with people again and met Chris Flowers. And really embraced it from that point. I don't know if this is true of everybody, but as you get involved in the world of work, real life gets in the way of pleasure. And you have to make priorities. And, people like your wife or your family insist on that it should be prioritized, which I've never approved of, but that's their view.
Fools. Absolute fools.
It's their view. And it removes 5 to years from our wargaming lives. And I can still hold a grudge about that for a long time.
Yeah.
But once I met Chris, I was then very generously invited to take part in his Wargames at the big table. And obviously, a lot of the people at Chris's table are ex-Leeds people anyway, or still current Leeds people, actually. So that can be great fun. And it just, Leeds, I suppose Leeds was the foundations of my getting into the hobby. And then since then, I've been adding different layers onto it. But Leeds, I always think, was the foundation, especially the club. Steve Sykes and the club were my real introduction to what I would call proper wargame, as opposed to chucking a load of Airfix toys in the table and rolling a few dice. You learn everything. The thing about the club, and it's hard to underestimate it. People teach you about basing things. They teach you about painting techniques. And I wasn't a great painter, but Steve and a couple of guys had this technique of underspraying in white or undercoating in white, and then running acrylics onto them, sometimes a little bit diluted, so they go into the folds of the uniforms.
Yes,
and things.
yeah.
And it made a really nice impact. And you see, you didn't do much in the way of dry brushing then, because they already had a lot of definition, and the paint worked nicely. You learn techniques of terrain and how to use the rules. The other thing was you learned the rules, because people still know that. Actually, so Leeds was my foundation of wargaming, and every since.
It's interesting that you mentioned the technique with the acrylic watered down acrylic paints, because they now call them contrast paints and charge you an extra 20 quid.
That's true. I read that
for a watery paint, which I'm never ever going to get.
No.
But I do have to mention Hellifield, because Hellifield used to be on my patch when I worked in Skipton. And was the cafe at the train station open when you were there?
Yes, it was.
Did you ever visit and have? And there was I had to have a word with them about this a number of times. They had a thing called the fireman's breakfast.
Yes.
So I'd walk in my full gear and go, I'm not having that.
I knew the guy who ran it, Steve. Steve had retired from his life working at the plough-in in Wigglesworth, because his parents owned the plough in Wigglesworth, and then and his brother worked as a a whiskey buyer at the fantastic whiskey place in Skipton, and Steve ran a great little cafe there. Knew all the regulars, and I just used to walk around once a week, grab a bacon sandwich, a cup of tea, and a chat with Steve. Steve was heavily into the steam locals. We got lots in Hellifield at that time, charters in particular. So you'd see everything you could possibly imagine there. Wonderful Black Fives, Jubilees, lots of Bresley stuff. I know this isn't a real modelling podcast, but it was for a while.
Half the audience are going, what?
What's he talking about? Well, for a while at Hellifield, when we first went back, when we came back from Scotland originally, because I lived in Hellifield twice as well, we lived in a place called Lancashire and Yorkshire Terrace, which had been built by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company, and it overlooked the Clitheroe Blackburn spur that came out of Hellifield. So you'd see all the steam locals going up and down there, and I had a top floor Wargames painting and modelling room for a time. So yeah, Hellifield was a good place to be. There weren't any war games there, but there was loads of steam local fans.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wonderful.
And there was a chap who used to go through in a blue in Perthshire, I remember. Subaru from time to time. Very, very quick.
Yeah, very, very quick. Anyway, that's why my hair's still swept back. You see, still from driving those.
Still windswept and interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So we're coming up for an hour already, and I knew this would happen.
That's unbelievable.
I knew this would happen. But there's a couple of things just before we finish off this section I want to kind of go through. And the first one is the Venn diagram of wargaming that I do with all my guests.
Oh, yes.
And that's kind of just breaking down your hobby into wargaming, painter, collector, and historian, and just getting you to explain where you fit on that Venn diagram and how the different bits overlap.
So in my Venn diagram, historian is the biggest egg. It's a very, very big egg. I've got a huge collection of history books. I read all sorts of history, not just the period of Wargame, because I'm just fascinated by it. So historian's a big thing for me. Then Wargamer is the next biggest egg. Particularly, I don't think there's anything nicer. I don't think there's a nicer way to spend an afternoon than laying out a Wargames table, a big
Yes.
table.
Yes.
It's an extremely pleasant way to occupy your time. Coffee in the afternoon, glass of wine in the evening, whichever way around you're doing it. And I can spend 2 or 3 days laying out my table for the next thing I'm going to do and enjoy every minute of it. And looking
It's
at
it's
and
a yeah. It's
uh,
amazing how wargamers can up here we call it pottering. You
yes,
can just potter. You can just potter around your wargames room for hours. And if only we could harness that energy,
yes,
there'd be no global warming because we are just like we just do things. And you
I
might
just
come downstairs and you don't know what you're doing, but you've reorganized something
yeah. Well, this is
that
it,
needed
and
reorganizing.
I think that's a really important insight you've shared there, Ken, because
Yeah.
I can go into my war game and I'll come back out, I'll go in the room and I'll come back out a couple of hours later to my wife and say, "What have you done?" I said, "Oh, not very much," but and she'll think, "Well, you were there for 2 hours." Well, I've done loads of stuff, but it's just been tinkering at the edges. I've maybe pulled out a tray of a 1944 uh, armour brigade element, maybe the armoured troops, and decided to reorganise the way the companies sit in the tray, then put them back away again. Or I'll look at some of my buildings and think, oh, that bit you could do with an iron railing for what sort of getting because of a bit of iron railing and put it on that. And I honestly can spend many, many happy hours just moving things around in the war room. I've discussed it with Chris Flowers frequently. We both like just setting up a nice table.
Yeah.
And in fact, half the time, I'd be quite happy to pack it away and set up another one just to keep myself occupied.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so for me, the whole wargaming thing fits it, and it fits in with the history thing because when I'm setting the table up, I don't just use scenario guides. In fact, I sometimes rarely use scenario guides. I go to primary accounts and battles and look at the maps and look at the descriptions and try and understand where the important turning points were on the table. So, for example, I did one a couple of years ago called the Canadians Push on Carpiquet Airfield, which involves the Abbey Ardennes, where there's a terrible massacre of Canadian troops by dreadful SS troops. But the one element missing for me was the target, which is the airfield. Now, the scenario was set up, I think, for a 7 foot by 5 foot table. So I did it on 12 foot by 6 foot. So I studied the maps, got the airfield into position, and that then made sense for why these guys were pushing down this road through all these villages, not realising there's a bloke on top of the abbey watching everything they're doing and putting an enfilading side. So that made the battle more understandable for me and more historically relevant. So yeah, the wargaming bit dovetails beautifully with the history bit, and actually it intersects the history bit very, very, goes larger. There's a big intersection bit there. In terms of painting, because of my low vision, not so much now. I'll paint terrain very happily. I struggle with some detail on buildings, and I can't really deal with uniforms now because I carry with me. Your friends won't get to see it, but I carry with me.
Oh yeah, well,
big problem. Magnifying glass. I have lots of age for low vision. I attend a low vision clinic, so you have to find a way around that to make your hobby still enjoyable. So the painting thing, I outsource. Bumping into Chris Flowers was one of the best ways of re-energizing my 20mm work because I'd been 15 for a long time. The eyesight made that really very difficult.
Yeah.
So I got into 20, and I've basically been trying to relocate Chrissy's 20mm collection into the Perthshire War Room, and quite successfully so far. Until I realized how vast his World War II collection was. I thought I was making a good chunk of it. Turns out I've only just scratched a very tiny surface. And Steve Shan and other people have painted bits and pieces for me. The people up here who do some painting. So the painting bit for me, it's important to get it done, but it's a small part of my own Venn diagram. What was the final thing? Was model?
We have Wargaming Pet Collector.
Collector.
We've not done.
Yes. This is where I get nervous about this part of the conversation in case my wife is listening. You see, she has a different definition of collector, and she uses the word hoarder, which I think is deeply unkind. If I'm honest,
it's a fine line.
Well, there are many things under my Wargames table that I do know what they are and why they're there. I have on occasion come across what I call doublers. So I'll be at a Wargame show and I'll buy a nice book and this is a lovely book, I'll take it home. And when I go to put it in the shelf, there's already the copy of the book there.
Yes,
so
done that.
Too. So then they
Wow.
occur on eBay or give them to one of my friends at the club or whatever it would be. The same sadly with kit as well. I currently own 3 airfix pontoon bridges, and to my abject horror, I've never used one of them. So I don't quite understand why I need 3. In fact, one of them is boxed, unopened. I think there's some tape on it, polythene.
Oh, that might be worth money, that, on eBay.
Well, no, but I might need a use for it in the future.
Yeah,
if,
exactly.
If I choose to cross a very wide river, I might be.
You might
I mean,
need 3
I did
pontoon
cross
brushes.
the Meuse recently, but I didn't need them for that. I had a German pontoon bridge, so that was okay. So I'm a big collector. I like collecting things. I have lots of airfix aircraft with a hole drilled in the bottom of them, waiting to go to stock in the market, particularly French, because I've got a big 1940s French army, huge 1940s French army, which I bought from Chris, which has got a fantastic amount of cavalry and really, really weird aircraft. And the great thing about the French army, it was the Army of France was the largest army at the start of the Second World War, and by any measure the best equipped in terms of the kit they had, and also by any measure the really worst led.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's a great army to wargame. You get fantastic stuff from the turn. As I suppose is the British expedition, it's fully mechanised, unlike the Germans, fully mechanised and mobile. So yeah, I am a collector, big collector of kit. I'm also a collector of books. I've got lots of rules I never use. I just like buying them because I like reading rule systems. I'm interested in them. I like to know how they work. I'm a big collector of other things, small bits of military. So I've got RAF officers' mess sherry glasses or toast wraps and things like that. Just to, because there's a guy on TV called Henry Cole who does a lot of programs about motorbikes and things like that. And he calls these trinkets. And I think I have a lot of trinketage.
Yeah, I like stuff like that. Yeah. I like stuff like that. The odd little bit of history that you can just go, oh.
I wonder who last used it. Yeah, I wonder who last used it. That's what I was thinking.
I've got a little sextant from HMS Barham. And you think, what history?
Well, that'd be useful, yeah. So I like your Venn diagram idea. Mine's big history, big wargaming with a huge intersection between the two, minuscule painting but a lot of outsourcing, and then quite a big chunk of collecting going on as well. I have a lot of things I collect that I'll never have any dinky military stuff and daft things.
Well, got to have them. Got to have them.
Exactly.
Well, that's a lovely place to just draw a line under the first section. We've got still got loads and loads of stuff to talk about, but we'll call that the introduction, and we'll be back in a moment when we're going to talk to Ken about his wonderful Perthshire War Room. Well, lovely introduction there with Ken, and we got a bit nostalgic about Leeds and Leeds Wargames Club there, but it's the Yorkshire Gamer podcast. Live with it is all I'm going to say. So we're now gonna move on in the second part, and we're going to kind of cover big games in this as well. Is the Perthshire War Room, and this is something that, when Ken puts something up on Facebook or whatever, it always just goes ballistic with loads of people going, "Oh wow, that is absolutely fine." So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of go through. We've had some Wargame Shed geek outs in the past, but it doesn't mean we can't have another one. So I suppose the first thing that we mention is kind of you coming up to Perthshire and where you live now. And I think you said that it was because of your wife's parents? They were looking after
That's
them?
right, yes. Yeah. My wife's parents were, by the way, two of the nicest people you could ever hope to meet. I didn't know that people of that generation were allowed to be so of the party and bring the party with them. They were both lovely human beings, and but her dad got dementia and her mother became unwell, so we had to relocate up here to make sure Warren was near them. I lived in Dundee for a short while because that was just 5 minutes from where they lived. But then we were looking for a more rural location. Maura is of village stock. She was born in farm cottage and grew up in the countryside. And since my move to Hellifield, I've become really enamored with living in the countryside, like country people, like their approach to life. Hellifield was a lovely place to be. Quite a working village, but very friendly. We wanted to find somewhere. So as we were coming out of lockdown, we were looking for somewhere to live, and Maura had spotted this bungalow that we now live in a village that neither of us had ever been before. But it was only 30 minutes from our parents' home.
Oh, wow.
All the roads to our village are single track. So you only come to Ardler if you come into Ardler. And as we arrived in the village, the first thing that I noticed was there was a pub in the middle of the village. There was nothing else, but there was a pub, the Ardler Tavern. And I thought, well, this is a very, very strong start. And then we saw the bungalow, it had a lovely back garden, and we'd had a lot of conversations about my wargaming in retirement. And the conversations usually went to the lines of Maury would say, could you not find a better hobby that's less invasive of space?
Yeah.
To which I always replied, there isn't a better hobby.
No.
Because there isn't.
No.
So eventually I said, look, we need to find a house that's got one really big room, possibly up in the loft, whatever. And Maury said, I don't want them in the house. I just don't want them in the house. She said, I hate the dust, I hate the mess, I hate all your mates tramping around, just don't want men of a certain age visiting my toilets, just don't want it in the house. I said, well, that means I'm going to have to build a shed. Now, at that point, in fairness to Maura and in her defence, she thought a shed meant a shed. She thought it would be the sort of thing you might put the lawnmower in from time to time and maybe have something in the corner of it. In my head, the shed was going to be something about 25 feet long. So it was a different set of aspirations.
Same idea, different dimensions.
It's just a nuance. It's just a nuanced misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So we found this house and we bought it. It's a fantastic house. Really loved part of the countryside. Open fields, pub directly across the road, but diagonally across the road, and single track roads. So the only people you get to see are people who should come here. And we know loads of people, you know. And so I started getting calls in from my Wargames room. And I had a number of requirements. I wanted a minimum size table of 12 by 6 that I could make 16 by 6 in extremis, which I can do. Yeah. But I wanted to be able to leave 12 by 6 because from a lot of my Wargames are solo, and 12 foot long is about enough to be walking around as a solo Wargame, to be honest. So we ended up with a shed, which is quite a big lump. And the people I found did the whole thing, because when I started looking, you could get lots of interesting buildings, but you had to put in the groundwork yourself, and the power and the lighting and the Wi-Fi and painting and flooring and everything like that. Whereas I found this one-stop shop in Fife, and they came up and they said, look, we'll build it in 5 weeks. The groundwork team will come up in week 1, lay out the groundwork, get it all sorted out, put the cable in for the electricity, and then for the next 4 weeks, the joiners will turn up and they'll be able to build 5 weeks' time we'll hand it to you. And that was exactly what happened.
Wow.
It was incredible. And they were superb. Absolutely superb. Meticulous, careful. So all that went well. So then I had this big room with a lovely laminate floor, Wi-Fi, lighting, window, everything you could possibly want, but I didn't have a table. So my next thought was, what sort of table do I want? And in the end, I decided I wanted 3 6x4 tables. Yep. When the razors certainly made 6x12, with the option of putting a temporary table at one end. So I was looking at tables, but I needed storage underneath. So in the end, I got workbenches, big heavy-duty workbenches with casters underneath. And so there's 3 of those. They are superb. They're on my blog. If people want to see the pictures, they're on the blog. But they're really, really sturdy. They'll take any amount of lead you might care to deposit on the top. The guy who delivered them, he was Polish. And he turned up, they were made somewhere down south in England, and he turned up in his van, and he brought all the component parts. They came in big lumps, he had to scoot them, put them in, brought the first bit in, and he said, where are your tools? I said, I beg your pardon? He said, where are your tools? I said, I've got no tools. He said, these are workbenches. I said, I know, they're for war games. I've got to put toy soldiers and tanks on. He put his head to his hand and said, these are not for toys. These are too strong for toys. I mean, he had a bit of a rant.
Oh, bless him.
Anyway, I showed him some things of what I had in mind. He went, he says, you people in England are crazy. I said, we're in Scotland. Oh, okay. So he brought them in. I assembled them, pushed them together, and started getting the trade sorted out from big games. And that was when the YouTube thing hit me. I thought, one of the reasons I didn't do a podcast was because you actually came.
My fault.
Because I thought, well, how am I supposed to compete with this? He's got a track record. He's got a name. He's already established as the big demonstration game.
Yeah.
I have to do something different. And so that's when I thought a YouTube channel. I thought, what can possibly be wrong? A man in his 60s who doesn't like computers trying to set up a YouTube channel.
What could go wrong?
I've actually enjoyed it, I have to say, and it's engaged a lot of people with my solo games. I've played games in the War Room with Chris on an iPad.
Yeah.
And I point the iPad at the table and you can see broadly what's going on. And it introduces a really interesting element of fog of war.
Yeah, it does.
So I'll send Chris a map or a photograph, like an aerial photograph, and I'll make it black and white and a bit fuzzy with a bit of Photoshop work. So he gets his aerial photographs and he gets his order of battle, but he doesn't know where any of the enemy are. And it makes for a fascinating new way of wargaming because you don't have to worry about markers on the table. You only deploy things when it comes across in his invisible range, and he can't see any enemy. He's just looking at a god's view of the table and sometimes the occasional close-up. And it makes for a really exciting game. I think Chris has enjoyed the couple that we've done. It'd be really quite interesting fun. And solo wargaming allows me to play things in quite an historical fashion without an opponent trying to do something unhistorical from time to time. And, when I go to the club, I love one-on-one games or multiple games, or even go to Chris's, exactly the same. But I do like this aspect of megalomaniac control, where you can sort of say, no, the Germans would have done all that. We'll just go down there historically, so let's make them do that. Now, your opponent might not want to do that. You can do it yourself.
Yeah.
I did an attack on the German radar station at Douvres using British flail tanks and armoured infantry. And I forced the British to adopt the same tactics that they'd used just after D-Day. And it made for a very messy battle. Just really pretty much what I expected. So the War Room's just been a great godsend to me for any reason you might care to mention. And there's a sofa out there, big format TV, a DVD player. So, if I'm wanting to read a book or wanting to do a bit of terrain making, I might put a DVD of the Battle of the River Plate or Bridge Too Far, whatever might pop up. And because of the Wi-Fi, I can hook up onto various channels and so on. So it's a wonderful privilege having it. I still think Moira was surprised by the cost. But, that's a surprise she's got over it.
Is that the cost that you told her or the cost that it actually was?
Well, that's the sort of question. But given this is becoming a matter of record, it's hard for me to remember.
Very good. Very good. Good answer.
You've probably held interviews like this before.
I have many times. And I think it's only fair that we should give a shout out to your wife Moira, and all wargaming wives and partners out there, because they do put up with a massive amount. And of course, Moira's now got somewhere to just shove you off into.
Well, and you've nailed it. We'll be sitting about 7 o'clock at night. I'll have cooked a superb tea.
Yeah.
Often pie-based, but it'll be a superb tea. She'll sit back and say, "Oh, it's delicious." I know, it was great, wasn't it? And I'll sit back and get restful. In about 10 minutes, she'll say, "Oh, Escape to the Country Zone in 20 minutes." And I'll go, "Really? Right. It's just,
yeah, we've done that.
Isn't it about time you popped out to the War Room?" And this becomes quite a regular thing. So I'm thinking of putting in a couple of unexpected sorties back into the house to find out what's going on every time I get evacuated.
Yeah, I reckon you need one of them spy cameras in the house just to find out what's going on.
Yes.
You mentioned there solo gaming. Have you found a club up near where you are, or is there anybody nearby into gaming that you're aware of?
Yeah. No, I go to the Kirmia Club when I can. Obviously, the health things impacted that. When you're going through extended periods of chemotherapy, you have to go into kind of a personal lockdown because of your immunosuppression. But the Kirmia Club's been really welcome. There's some great members there. Dale Smith is the chair there. There's other good wargamers there. Steve Shaw, Jim McGinley, and of course the great Charles Escalante, who is... He's currently writing a book of new scenarios for Horse and Muscle. And one of the last times I was there, he invited me to take part in a scenario where you were trying to evacuate some British artillery off the table while being harried by French cavalry, which was a really interesting game. And he's using his father's original The Wargame rules, which he updated and amended. These rules have been in play now for, I think, 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, it must be.
And Charles published an updated version of them in a large format book through Dave at caliber, and it's a superb set of rules. They're so easy to use, and they don't use much in the way of tables. So because of my vision, I found it really, really useful. So although I'm a real fan of Gilders in the grand manner, there's a lot of table and formatting action in that. Where and it's great if you're playing with other people who are familiar with that. But I found Charles Grant's rules really, really good and really very easy to learn quickly. So a bit of a shout out to Charles. He's kept the sort of the nostalgia of Wargame alive for me since I've been back. He invites me to contribute to his Wargamers annual every year, which with one exception I've managed to do. And he's a sort of quiet legend. He's not very showy. He's a retired brigadier from the army. And some of his wargaming heroes, like Peter Young, are also retired brigadiers. And I think he's still the official historian for the Black Watch.
Wow.
And the Black Watch Museum in Perth. But he's incredibly well connected in the wargaming world. His biggest friend, I think he would say, was probably Stuart Asquith.
Yeah.
And he certainly writes in his, he's got a book of memoirs. He writes about wargaming from the end of the Second World War to the present period, and it features his father, him, his son, and his grandson. And it's a really interesting,
it's
a nice book to read.
Yeah.
It's a nice book to read about a personal journey in wargaming over all those years. And he talks about the interest in that. He tells this wonderful story that whenever he was on leave, particularly from Northern Ireland, Stuart, you'd get in touch with Stuart and say, any chance for getting this weekend and we get it over? And Stuart would always say, yeah, absolutely, down we come. But actually, he found out after Stuart's death that Stuart would move heaven and earth to make sure he was available. So Charles could get away and have a war game. And he was an extremely generous and gentlemanly opponent. And I really enjoyed playing a war game with him. And his little anecdotes that he can share with you while he's playing the game are just treasures, absolute treasures. But yes, his book is a lovely book and well worth checking out.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for that one. When you, and obviously I'm aware that you're on the record, but when you were looking for your new house up in where you are now in Perthshire, did the consideration of a wargaming shed or room form a major part in the choosing of the house?
Yes, absolutely. I decided I either had to have a double or triple garage or a shed, and that was agreed right at the start. So our main criteria was it either had to have a double or triple garage, or there had to be space in the garden for a big room that wouldn't impact the garden. And that was key consideration, because Laura loves gardening. I like looking at the garden; it's a lovely thing to look at. And so I wanted space for the wargame, and really. And I think if I hadn't had my wargame room, I might have gone slightly barky, to be honest. Not just with my various illnesses, but actually, it's just a great thing to have. It's a great way of occupying the time. You meet the best people. You have wonderful contact with people, on Twitter and Facebook. I have lovely conversations with people from all over the planet, people in Australia, North America, France, Germany, even some in Britain. It's a really, really lovely thing to do. And I've come across lots of really nice people also you wouldn't normally meet, a lot of historians. Peter Caddick Adams, Jim Holland, Al Murray, who's obviously known as the pub comedian, pub landlord, but is an Oxford-trained historian and writes extremely good history. And his knowledge of the Arnhem battleground is down to the level of minutiae for names and details of actions and what happened, and just extraordinary depth of knowledge. Jim Holland's ability to bring history alive, I think, is second to none. I think he just tells the story of individual soldiers and leaders with a real sense of care for getting their story right. So, although I was looking for a room, I hadn't realised just how great it would be. It's been fantastic, and I commend this idea to everyone.
Yeah, exactly. We need. I think you mentioned it earlier on. Escape to the Country that your wife was watching,
Yes.
and I do believe that there was one episode where the guy on it was looking for a war games room.
I can remember seeing him. Yes,
and my wife was very similar to yourself. I'll be doing something, painting or whatever, and my wife will be watching it. And she always goes on about that episode.
Yeah,
And my wife is into horses, and they don't like her. They keep throwing her off, and she breaks her
yeah,
back and
yeah,
stuff like that. But it's by the by, apparently. So we're effectively looking for a stately home that she can have
yes.
horses and I can have a massive war game. So we're never going to do it, but
So basically, you need stables in the ballroom.
yes, basically, yeah. That would suit me fine. So if it's any dukes or whatever, short of a bit of money, you need to sell your
Yes.
country residence off for the same price as a stone terrace in Leeds.
Yes.
We'll do your
Yes.
deal. We'll do your deal without a shadow of a doubt. So you looking back on the build and everything that you've done with it, is there
Yeah.
anything that you would have that now you've done it, you would have liked to have had in that you didn't consider at the time, or did you think you got it right?
In terms of wargaming, I've got it right. What I should have done was had a water supply toilet put in. I didn't do that. And that was because the building's in the back garden and all the water and drains are everything out to the front of the house.
Hmm.
And it would have been very difficult to get everything round within the kind of budget my wife was expecting. As it turned out, it was very difficult to deliver it in the budget she was expecting anyway. But I think that's one thing I would change.
Yeah.
It's not a massive problem or anything, but it's the kind of thing would mean I could stay on there for longer, which I suspect my wife would probably approve of.
You
But
might need to go for an extension.
exactly in terms of I've already got 3 sheds. I mean, I think there'll be
Oh,
complaints about that.
3 sheds can. Oh,
3
yeah.
sheds can, absolutely. Oh yeah, bring back Monty Python. 3 sheds can. No, I think the things to look out for. I was talking with another war gamer called Chris Charlton about this because
I know
Chris
Chris.
has built a war room in his village in just north of York, and the big consideration for me was I was fixated on the size of the table I wanted.
Mm.
You know, you've got a phrase "go big or go home"
Yeah.
on your podcasts, and I'm completely signed up to that. You know, 12 by 6 for my solo games, 16 by 6 for when people might come around. That for me is a minimum requirement because I just thoroughly enjoy getting at least a couple of brigades on the table and making them do interesting things in terms of the modern stuff. I can't think of anything else I would change because the Wi-Fi is really important.
Mm.
I would have, I mean, if I could have done this podcast via my iPad, I'd probably have done it from out in the war room. But I was nervous about how well it would work compared to Google Chrome, as you suggested. So I was stuck with Chrome. But the Wi-Fi out there is very, very good. I'd always recommend getting a large widescreen telly because then you can have your best entertainments in the right environment. Somewhere comfortable to sit so you can have a nice cup of tea or a glass of wine and ponder a book. And somewhere to store. You need a lot of storage.
You do.
You know, Billy bookcases and lots of under-table storage normally sort you out.
Well, I found the best solution to storage is getting rid of the kids.
Yes, I fortunately, you see, we didn't have kids, so that was a default position that I think I would encourage other people to go with. We've got nephews, which is great, and nieces because it means you can hand them back on a regular basis.
Perfect.
And it's less expensive as well, actually.
Yeah, I now our lad's left home. My wife's moved into his bedroom as her office, and then I've moved in the top floor because it's a 3-4 classic Yorkshire stone terrace.
Yeah, yeah.
I've gone Wargames room, and it used to be a spare bedroom. Well, that is now the auxiliary Wargames room. So it spreads. But as you get older, everything spreads, doesn't it? So
it absolutely does. Actually, the idea of an auxiliary walk-in room, that's an interesting concept.
Auxiliary Wargames room. It's
so
like
getting my head rolling now.
Yeah, it's like, and this used to send everyone into pails of laughter at work because I would always carry an emergency pork pie. So in my kit bag there was a Tupperware box sealed with a pork pie in it. And I can be at a job for 10, 12 hours.
Yeah.
And when I bring out my emergency pork pie, everyone goes, emergency pork pie time.
Yes. Yes.
And everyone then realizes what a brilliant idea it is, and I'm not stupid, which is what most people think when they hear of the emergency pork pie. But it
No,
is,
it's a wonderful concept. When I was working in financial services, I used to visit some guys who lived in Elland. They had a financial services out in Elland, and they were pork pie aficionados.
ooh,
And they used to ring me up the day before I was going to see them and say, where are you going to go today, Ken, before you come see us tomorrow? And I would say, Pontefract, where? And they said, oh, could you get a pork pie for us from such and such a shop? We've
yes.
heard we need to test it out.
Mm.
So I would turn up on their premises with 3 pork pies, one for each of them and one for me, and they would warm them up, obviously, because we were in Yorkshire.
Mm.
And occasionally they would have emergency mushy peas in their kitchen.
Oh, emergency mushy peas.
And mint sauce.
Oh, wow. Now we're
A
talking.
hot pork pie, mushy peas, mint sauce. I remember there was a pub in Leeds when I was a student, it was on Infirmary Street, we called it Infirmary Street and St Paul Street. It was under the Bank of India. It's called Brampton List.
Oh, yeah.
They only did one lunchtime food, which was a bowl with a hot pork pie, mushy peas, mint sauce. Their tables were barrels.
Yeah.
And you could just fit a couple of those bowls and a couple of pints in each barrel.
See, for me, that's 2-star Michelin. None of this fucking little bit of a scallop with a jus on it.
Yes,
That's just bollocks.
yes,
Pork pie, mushy peas, mint sauce on a beer barrel. That is 2-star. I might start a Yorkshire Gamer restaurant star system.
I think you need to go down that road. In fact, I've had to introduce the concept of the hot pork pie in Scotland for 2 reasons. First of all, Scottish butchers make magnificent pies, but they don't quite make the density of a pork pie you get in Yorkshire. Proper one from Knaresborough, something like that.
Appleton's in there.
Secondly, yes, exactly. Secondly, they eat them cold.
Oh, weird people, strange people.
And they think heating up a pork pie is dangerous. So I've had to educate people when they come and visit that this is not only not dangerous, but it's fantastic. It's food of the gods.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I've not mentioned it for a while, but I was, one of my claims to fame is I was once a judge at the World Pork Pie Championships.
Oh, no, that's not a job. That's just a joyous moment in your life.
There used to be this lovely chap who would come out work with us from one of the local radio stations, and he organised the World Pork Pie Championship, which was in Barn Aldwick, or Barlick as it's known.
Barlick, yes.
It's known locally. And he invited us over to be, because he knew we liked our pies, obviously. He spent more than 10 minutes with us. That's one of my claims to fame.
Oh. I'm a bit worried about this. Isn't Barlick on the wrong side of the border?
It is just.
Yes.
Just. We have
Try blimey, yes. Just the wrong side of Skipton, yeah.
Special disposition. Through Thornton and close your eyes when you're going through Thornton and Craven and you're there.
Yes.
So it's to be a judge on the World Pork Pie Championship, I did it. I went across the board.
Fantastic.
But yeah, that is one of my claims to fame, which I'm very proud of. And we'll just cover it off here, mate. You are a pie fan yourself, and
yes.
Regularly you go on these bike rides that we'll talk about later on.
Sure.
But you do always end up eating a pie at a local hostillery. So where is it that you stop so we can give them a shout out for a good pie?
So the best place I stop at is called the Barry Box. It's a local farm shop. It's on my way back from my bike ride. It's 1.5 miles from our village, and they get pie deliveries from H.W. Irvins of Blairgowrie, who make magnificent steak and gravy pies, steak and other type of pies, haggis and steak pies, Scotch pies, and macaroni pies. Macaroni pies is a very big thing up here.
Macaroni pie. Not tried one of those.
Macaroni cheese and a pie. It's the future, Ken. In fact, we get a fish van once a week in the village on Thursday, and the fish van from Arbroath brings with it hadderoni pies, which is smoked haddock and macaroni cheese in a pie.
Now, an Arbroath smoky is something that I absolutely love. So
Unbelievable.
an arbo
Unbelievable.
smoky in a macaroni pie. Ooh.
Yeah, yeah. I know. Unbelievable. And of course, smoked fish and cheese go beautifully together.
Mm.
And you get the advantage of placing macaroni, carbohydrate, inside a pie, carbohydrate, for the double hit. A lot of pies up in this part of the world are topped with potato or potato and beans or all kinds of weird things. So there's the only thing they haven't nailed up here yet is the Scotch pie. But I'm working on it. But yes, I'm also, I tend to judge two types of food stuff when I'm out and about. One is sausages in a filled roll, sausage roll, and the other is pies. One of my favourite filled rolls, which is absolutely food of the gods, at the Forfar Golf Driving Range Cafe, which we only go to for the cafe.
Yeah.
They serve Stornoway black pudding and fried egg roll. Magnus, Stornoway black pudding is the finest black pudding you'll ever find, and it leaves that very horrible, full of hard fat nonsense well behind.
Oh. Well, having lived in Hellifield, I would imagine that you are familiar with Drake and Macefield.
Oh, yes, and superb vendors of pies they are. They had a branch in Settle, as well as in Skipton. And in fact, for a while, they supplied the village shop in Hellifield. One shop had supplies from Drake and Macefield pies are outstanding, absolutely outstanding.
Well, I had my own official drive-through Drake and Macefield, which is unknown to the rest of the public. But on a morning, on the industrial estate in Skipton,
yes,
is where they make them. And
that's right. Yeah.
And on the morning, about 5 o'clock, I'd rumble up in my works vehicle and knock on the door, and they would do me a special delivery. I paid for them, but
yes,
they would, usual Ken. Hey!
Yes.
So I'd have a 5 o'clock.
And also, in Skipton, on the confluence of the road that comes from Garvey, what's that, Water Street, is it?
Yeah.
Heading into town, on the corner there, just before you turn up to the church, there's a superb vendor of hot pork pies.
Is that Stainforth?
You'll see a queue down the road all the time.
Is that Stainforth's?
I think it is. I think it is, yes.
Yeah.
Very good indeed. So that's the only thing we haven't quite sorted in Scotland is a really, really good hot pork pie offer. We'll get there.
Yeah, we will. And I would imagine
sort of missionary work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think now our audience are all feeling extremely hungry. So we'll take a short break before we do the Yorkshire Game of Features section, whilst you all go and get a pork pie. Well, after discussing pork pies at extreme length, which is, I know what you come to a Wargames podcast for, if you come into a Yorkshire Game Award, this is the sort of stuff that you get on top of the wargaming stuff that WSS give you on a podcast. They give you an hour of concentrated wargaming. I give you 3 hours of spread out wargaming with pies in the middle. Which is the best?
Well, I'll tell you what you do, Ken. You deliver a wargaming lifestyle podcast.
Oh dear, it's not very. It wouldn't be very good for our heart with my method of dieting. I would have to say, but there we go. So we move on to neatly onto the features section, and the first part is the Yorkshire Gamer quiz, and this has caused a number of traumatic experiences over the years. But it's a series of 20 questions with a massive regional bias. And as I've said on many, many occasions, that this is not how good a gamer you are. This is how Yorkshire gamer you are. So I would imagine if you've got this far in the podcast, you're not going to get upset. But if you have accidentally just tuned in at this point and you're sensitive about your style of wargaming, then maybe fast forward 10 minutes, I would suggest. Right, so I think you know the rules, Ken. It's usually one or the other, or a quick answer. But if you want to expand or have a chat on any of the questions, then please do so. So, question 1: go big or go home?
Go big.
Go big. Excellent. It's the only way. We mentioned these earlier on as well. Contrast paints, are they great or are they a gimmick?
Well, I suspect they're a gimmick, particularly because you now explained to me they're actually just a reinvention of a previous technique.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing new. It's nothing new in the world of wargaming. It
No.
comes round and round and round. I had a friend at art school, and I'm Carl, who I've mentioned before on the show, and he would bring us all these techniques from art school that was being used in art. And these are all the things now that everyone's shouting out as going, it's the latest thing, zenith highlighting and all this. It's like people have been doing it for fucking years.
Yes.
Loads of people come to me and go, "Oh, that oil painting horses in oils, Ken. Fantastic technique you've come up with there." It's like I haven't come up with it. It was 1970s people were doing that. Anyway, right. Paintbrushes. I know you're not doing much painting now, Ken, but
No.
would you go for Windsor and Newton, posh and expensive southern stuff, or pro art from Skipton?
Well, it would have to be pro art from Skipton for the very reason that they're from Skipton. And actually, they are very, very good. I have some.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely, absolutely good. And it's apparently it's pro RT according to the owner, but I always call it pro art.
I think that's an embellishment too far.
Yeah, well, exactly. And one of the funny things that I didn't realise at the time was when I interviewed him. And if you haven't listened, people who are listening to this now, go back because it is a fascinating 2 hours on paintbrushes. You're never going to get another paint podcast for 2 hours on paintbrushes, but there is one. And I didn't realise until afterwards because I've got it so stuck in my head that it's pro art that when I listened back to that podcast, I could hear Peter going pro RT all the way through it, and I'm going yes, and your dad started pro art, and he go yes, my dad did start pro RT.
Oh, fantastic!
Sorry,
man,
Peter.
man.
I apologise, but he's a lovely lad, and I have a good chat with him.
It's a good product. It's a very good product.
Yeah, cracking product. Question 4: 96 figures. Is that an army or a unit of pike?
It's an element of pike, yeah.
Elements of pike.
It's absolutely not an army.
Not yeah. Somebody, people highlight stuff to me because I don't see everything. And somebody said, I've just watched this video, Ken, link, about their huge army. And I watched it and I'm going, okay, very different definitions.
Yes.
So I won a dictionary in 1984 for my school woodwork prize. And huge is not defined as what that was in my school 1984. Might have changed. Might have got updated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There we go. Question 5: 6x4 table. Is that a big game or a small game?
It's a small game.
Small game. You're doing very well so far, but question 18 is going to go wrong for you. So let's just keep going. Question 6. Do you like a points-based battle or an historical order of battle?
I detest points-based battles. I love historical. I know why people do them, and I guess they make sense for competitions, but I don't see the point.
No.
Literally,
hey, I like that.
I know. Slip that in, yeah.
Like that.
No, and it just doesn't make any sense. When in real life did two generals have a chat in a cafe around the corner from the battlefield and say, "Can we just agree how many people are deploying today?" Just. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I understand what happens. People who want a fairer side game, I understand it, I get it, but it's not for me.
No, and I think going back to the Lardies we mentioned now earlier on, they're big proponents of like link scenarios where things affect each other, and where you can fight a game against the odds, but you can win in inverted commas by completing objectives, or like you mentioned earlier on that game you were talking about getting the British artillery off the table. It's that sort of thing that that can make a game, and you don't need points, you just need good scenarios.
Oh, exactly. And actually, on that point, Charles Grant's books from I don't know when they were 1980s programmed wargame scenarios and scenarios for wargamers are fantastic ways of putting together a non-points based interesting one.
Yeah. There's definitely other alternatives out there for certain. Question 7. You don't do much painting now, but if you did, would you have a wet palette or an old bit of MDF to mix your paint on?
Well, I used to mix them on bits of card, just a piece of card.
Bits of card, brilliant. People are paying like 20 quid for like a tub with some with some paper in and water.
I think it
Go
may
to your
say palette on it just to cheer you up.
Yes, that's true. But if you go to your Chinese restaurant and have a takeaway,
Yes.
you get 15 free wet pallets. You
Yes.
just need to clean them
Yes.
out,
Yes.
and your brush might taste of sweet and sour sauce for a couple of months. But apart from that,
Well, you'd be pleased to know that I mix my textured terrain, my sieved pet wood shavings, which was a tip from Colin Rumford, with my powder paint and my PVA in Lurpak tubs.
nice, recycling.
Yep.
We are the future
We
of
are.
the blue
We are.
planet.
We're
Of the blue
sustainable.
planet.
We're sustainable.
Exactly. We're getting all the blame from the kids
Yes.
about
Yes.
temperature rising, and
Yes.
here we are reusing them Lurpak tubs to mix stuff.
Exactly.
Perfect. When you were undercoating figures, I know again you're not doing much painting now, but when you did, would you go with a black or a white undercoat?
I always used to use white because of the technique I discussed it.
It's very much technique based for sure.
Yeah.
Second regionally biased question:
Yep.
hot drink, Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
That's not even a fair question. Yorkshire tea.
Exactly.
But where does the thinking process come in that?
I saw something. I think it was on Twitter where some guy was really going off at them about you don't make it in Yorkshire and it's not grown in Yorkshire. Why is it Yorkshire tea? And then at the end, I mean, the guy who does the Yorkshire tea Twitter, and if you don't follow him, please do because he's absolutely brilliant. And he said, "Yeah, I've got to admit we've been lying. It's actually mine. It's actually comes out of the ground from a mine in Barnes."
Fantastic.
Oh dear me. So yeah, people say we don't have a sense of humour up here.
Well,
but
people get very vexed on Twitter though. They really
yeah,
do.
yeah, they get vexed. I'm running this the Wargaming of World the World Cup of Wargaming Pet Hates
Yes,
at
I
the
know. I've
moment.
been taking part.
Yeah, and some people are getting so stressed with it, and they just haven't realised that a pet hate is something that is usually something to do with yourself and something really, really funny that just
Yes.
drives you mad.
Yes.
Like unpainted flag edges that Giles Ellison put into Room 101. It was like I did paint my flag edges, but I hadn't really noticed it
Yeah.
like I really hate. But now I can look at a picture of like a 20-foot table with 3,000 figures, and the first thing I will see is an unpainted flag edge
Or unpainted base edges.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like,
you still see it. Horror.
Oh, it's just mad. Now, so with your World War II stuff, this doesn't matter, or it's not part of it as much. But for a war games unit, a classic kind of Napoleonic or similar war game unit, would you like to see your figures tightly packed or socially distanced?
I like them tightly packed.
I'm
not sure what the correct answer is there, but I like them. I like to look like a mass. I want them to look like a mass.
Yeah, those sods games and the Peter Gilder stuff that you see, where you've got 8 figures on a 60 by 40 base. Brilliant, absolutely.
Well, when Chris Flowers deploys his Grand Manor regiments on the table, they're big lumps. They are really big lumps. You don't want to crunch a lot of cavalry into them too lightly. They are shockingly big lumps.
Yeah, and some of those cavalry regiments as well are like 48 figures of 28 metal.
Yes.
Young listeners,
yes,
your 12-figure cavalry regiments aren't big.
No, they're not.
48, and they're certainly not heavy.
No, they're certainly not heavy. No, I mean, I'd pick up all that from playing on Chrissy's table and definitely want mass racks.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Question 11. A 2-hour club game or a weekend monster game?
Oh, weekend monster game.
It's
that's why the Wargames room lets me leave stuff up. I'll play for days to make sure I get the outcome that's going to happen. And you have to do club games, and that's understandable. But that would never be my preference.
No, and you can always tell Moira that you're getting your money's worth. You spent all that money on that shed.
Exactly.
You've got to use it. You've got to use it. It's necessity.
Yes.
So, question 12. I haven't seen any of these on your food pictures,
Right.
but is avocado, are they just posh mushy peas?
Oh, they're just posh mushy peas. What a waste of the food stuff on that one, particularly if it appears on a breakfast food plate. Somebody else at a cafe recently, and somebody said, "Oh, today's special is what was it? Oh, it was poached eggs and avocado on toast." I thought, why would you ruin a poached egg with an avocado fruit?
Oh, it looks like cat sick. It's just
It just
horrible.
it's not a nice way to go. And actually,
No,
they're never ripe,
no. No.
or
And
they're
apparently,
overripe.
I can't remember who told me this. It might have even been Henry Hyde. Apparently, they're really, really bad for the environment because they take loads and loads and loads of water to get them to be unripe.
Well,
So
I'm not sure I've seen many fields of avocados around where I live,
no.
so they must have to
Or
be
to,
transported here.
yeah, we're too busy growing tea where we are.
All we grow around here are potatoes, peas, broccoli, and carrots.
Mm.
You don't need much more than that.
No, no, you can live on that. You can definitely live on that in pie form.
Yes.
No pressure on you here, Ken. This is the
Right.
universal question
Yep.
that everyone has answered one way. So you are
Right.
guess 75. So there's no pressure on you here to get it the right way. But round dice, spherical dice, are they allowed or banned on your table?
They are the objets of the devil.
Brilliant, brilliant. 75 ticks
Oh,
on that
well, I mean,
question.
it's one of those things. Some student says, "Oh, look, I've invited round dice." The only response to that is why.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the people on the Wargame Pet Hate competition have been going, "Oh, I've never seen these." So I've just said yes because I've saved you from them from my 4.5 year crusade against round
Yes.
dice.
Utterly
I, I,
pointless. Stupid.
I have stopped their distribution within
Good.
the UK.
Good. You've
Oh,
taken
right,
enforcement
okay.
action.
Yeah, it's going to go on the list of achievements when I retire. So question 14, relatively new question, but it's what I thought of a while back, and I thought, oh, I need to add it in. And it replaced the haddock or cod question if
Oh,
you
yeah.
if
Remember
you
that one,
missed a few.
yes. Yeah.
So this is War Games measurements. Are you preferring glorious imperial inches and feet, or that dodgy French money?
Well, my table is 20 feet by 6 feet.
Good.
And I had, Maura came back once. I needed another tape measure because there's an extra person coming around one day. I've got 6 or 7 tape measures, but I need more.
Mm.
So she got one for me at B&Q, and it didn't have inches on it.
Oh,
It went straight into the recycler. There was no point. It had no purpose in my existence.
you see, we left Europe purely so that we could have tape measures with inches on, not centimeters, it's inches.
No, my tape was 20 feet by 6 inches. I have no idea how that would convert into unleaded, but that's what it is.
I had a wonderful one of my favourite stories or sayings was that there's not been a nation that's put a man on the moon using metric measurements, and quite funnily, apparently I'm not confirmed this is a fact check yet, but apparently the computers at NASA did work in metric because it was easier.
Yeah,
Well, it's just thick computers if you can't work. But
yeah.
anyway, but what they had to do was they had to convert it back into imperial for the screens so that the astronauts could work out where they were.
Fantastic.
Which I just thought was
That's
just pure
absolutely
brilliance.
glorious. Absolutely glorious.
Pure, absolutely brilliant. Right, you're doing very well so far, mate. You're doing very well
Good.
indeed.
Good.
I think we might have a different sort of opinion on this one. Question 15: do you like a good table and a set of rules, like a casualty table, or I think you've moved on from that?
Can't read them. Can't read them.
Yeah,
So by default, I have to say no.
yeah. Oh, I love them. I love them. The thing I've talked about it before, but Bruce Reed Taylor did a set of rules called Core Commander, and there was like a table that was two tables joined together.
Yes.
It might have even been three tables joined together, and you kind of went down one, and it came to the next table, and you go down to the next one and do your genius, absolute genius.
Do you remember? Do you remember John Sanders' wargaming book?
It doesn't ring a bell.
Doesn't really well. John Sanders, I don't think I've got it to hand actually. John Sanders did a book, and most of his wargame was based on desert wargaming. And he had like dials with cardboard dials with pointers on them and tables with things that went across them. I'll send you a couple of screenshots later.
Oh, I need to see that.
You do.
That
you
is
do.
my wargaming
Yeah,
porn.
I
I
was just
love
thinking
that
that.
sort of
Yes.
stuff. I just absolutely love anything technical. Give me a
I
bounce
mean, see,
stick.
when you're using this fella, it's not as much fun.
Yeah. No, I get that,
Magnifying
mate.
glasses make life a bit more
My,
tedious.
my engineering brain just finds stuff like that absolutely fascinating, and I do see people's eyes glazing over, but I can work out what's going on. That's the main thing. Question 16: 28 mil is king? Yes or no? You're a 20 mil gamer, aren't you?
Well, 28 mil is king for Napoleonic,
Yeah.
but it's 20 mil for me in World War II. 20 mil all day long, because 28's a bit too big for the big war game for me.
Yeah.
In
With those
modern
extended
terms, World War II terms.
extended distances. Question 17: unpainted miniatures allowed on the table? Yes or no?
No,
No.
no.
Excellent.
I'm not 7 years old.
No, exactly.
You know, we used to get
people
let's get those figures in cereal packets, which was nice.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it was.
shake out your sugar puffs and a little unit of infantry in it. But you know, you couldn't use them because they didn't look like anything real.
You see, those are the sorts of things that kids miss out on today.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is the free toy in cereals is one,
Yeah.
and the card in the PG tips.
Yes.
That was another one.
And the lucky bag, based on the American Civil War, with dollars in it. Do you remember lucky bags in sweet shops?
Yeah.
You used to get one that would have a little card about a battle or a general. Then you get some dollars, coins, and folding ones, and other bits and pieces with your sweets. Fantastic thing.
Right, I'm going to confess something here that I've just realised. This is like me doing whatever it is where you talk to the
Yes.
psychiatrist. It's like me doing that. I think now that my tea addiction, let's call it what it is down to those cards, because I used to drink
Yeah.
loads and loads and loads of tea, so that my mum had to buy another box of tea, so
Yes.
I'll get another card.
Yes. Isn't it funny, these little moments in history that change us?
Oh, brilliant. Right. Question 18. Bradford
I know what's
City or
coming.
Leeds
I know what's
United,
coming.
or your Leeds United?
Well, I'm going to preface my remarks by saying that I'm disappointed there isn't a York City category.
Oh, yes.
But
Popular.
what I will say is Leeds, all the way.
Leeds.
For lots of reasons. Brought up in Cookridge, one of our near neighbours was Paul Maitland, who lived he lived in a detached house and had a sports car. And his brother, my first job in life was working at Granway's supermarket in Horsforth on New Roadside. And next door was opened up a Maidley's DIY centre by Paul Maidley's brother. And Paul Maidley came down to do a pic for himself beside a cardboard cutout of Paul Maidley on the door. I often saw Peter Lorimer on his way into the betting shop next to the Bank of India on Infirmary Street when I was a student in Leeds. And we arrived in Leeds in 1966, and Leeds United were just about to arrive in that pomp. An amazing sight. And my sister knew Don Rivers' daughter. So there we are.
Oh, brilliant.
Leave it at that. So yeah, Leeds, all the way.
Yeah.
Back in the Premiership.
I do have to point out here that the last time Leeds and Bradford met in the League Cup, in the last time they met, full stop, Bradford won 2-1, and Billy Knott scored with a volley from outside the box, and James Hanson with a header into the top corner. Not that I remember and went mental when it happened.
Well, I'll counter that with the last time York City met Manchester United.
Oh, York City
at Old Trafford.
Oh, nice.
Schmeichel in goal.
Yep.
Paul Barnes for York City hat-trick, 3-1.
Oh, classic. And Manchester United haven't got any better.
No, and actually afterwards, Alan Ferguson said, we'll have our full team out for the replay at Booth and Pheasant, to which our manager said, yeah, so will we.
Oh, fantastic. I think you're going to get this one right. Question 19, Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
Oh, Yorkshire.
Of course. And the final question, Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil? Yes or no?
You see, that's a tricky one. I made a vow to myself that I wasn't going to be rude about anything to do with wargaming. Happily, Games Workshop has nothing to do with wargaming, so I'm not therefore required to be nice.
No.
No, they are the spawn of the devil's nasty uncle.
Excellent. That's what we like to see. That's what we like to see. Another fantastic effort there, Ken. Thank you very much for that. I kind of gave you half a point for 28 mil is king because you kind of and ahed it, but 82.5% is very, very reasonable.
Oh, I'm very pleased with that as a result.
And you were always scoring out of 95 because of the Bradford City or Leeds United. a bit like Richard Harris, who was just like, I've got one wrong before I start.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble with Bradford is you call it Bradford, but of course, anyone who lives in that part of the world would call it Bratford, and Putsey. There's a T in it. It's Bradford and Putsey. I used to love when our friends came down from Scotland, our cousins, etc., and they'd listen to the accents, and they would go, "What's a table?" It means we're going to the table.
Oh dear me!
Because in Yorkshire you could put a T in anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And not necessarily a Yorkshire team.
And vowels are in an endangered species. We just
absolutely. The funniest Yorkshire story, when my wife first came down to live with me, just the year before we got married, we lived in Hellifield, and she worked at Bradford and Bingley's head office in Bingley.
Oh yeah.
She worked at a team of guys on compliance, and she came back one night and said, "A bit worried about this guy Worby side." What's about? I think he's doing something with his mother he shouldn't be doing. So what do you mean? He said, well, yesterday he said he'd taken our lass to the chippy at Guiseley, to the Harry Ramsay's chippy at Guiseley, and Maura said to him, who's our lass? And he said, it's my man. She said, well, today he said he's taking our lass to the pictures for a romantic meal and then go back afterwards. I said, you need to understand that our lass in Yorkshire means any number of our lasses. Sister, mother, friend, girlfriend, wife, it can be anything. And she went, oh shit, thank God for that.
And I always get this, I always get people, everyone calls everyone love.
Yes.
Love. And somebody came up and started working with us I think they were from Northamptonshire or something like that. And they were very vocal and they went, if somebody calls me love, I'm going to fucking go to it. I'm not your fucking love. And I just had to sit them down and go, right, there's two ways of dealing with this. Yeah. It's either going to be the longest part of your life or you're going to start calling people love because everyone is going to call you love. So just get used to it.
And they do. My dad was scandalised, but my dad was one of 6 boys from Clydebank, and his parents and my mother's parents were all shipyard workers. And he came down to Yorkshire, obviously brought us down in 1966. He used to take the bus. His office was above the station in the city house in Leeds. And he used to get the bus from Cookeries down to work. And the bus conductor on the rear loader called him love. He said, where are you off to, love? My dad was absolutely scandalised. It took him many weeks to get used to this. Would never happen in Glasgow.
Yeah, love.
Way off to love.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Right, so we'll move on to Room 101. And, for our listeners, it was originally George Orwell's Room of Horror, where you would be subjected to your worst fears. But it was turned into a TV game show where people would put their kind of pet hates in, and it would be adjudicated by, I can't remember who did the original series, but it was adjudicated. I think Frank Skinner did it some stage during its run, and I think it's still going now. So I asked my gamers, my guests, to kind of have a free rant on it's a safe space, I think they call it now. You can slag anyone off you want during the next 5 minutes, but there are things, and I mentioned one earlier on the unpainted flag edges that just drive you mad, and there can be no rational reason to it whatsoever. You can just see something and go, what do you think that? And then calm down. So, Ken, is there anything in the world of wargaming that drives you a little bit bonkers?
Well, let me begin by warning any of your gentle listeners who do not read much history, this is the time to go and make a cup of tea. And I would encourage them to do that, because I'm not prepared to accept any argument on this. Room 101, I'm going to use the term and then explain it. The term I would use is unhistorical historical war games. And the reason I refer to them as unhistorical historical war games is because they want to do historical war games, but they don't want to understand the history. So they don't read the relevant history, and then they post in groups. I've got 2 actual questions that I've seen, one from the forum and one from Facebook. And these are both going into Room 101 pronto. First one, have a listen to this. Question for the hive mind. Don't even get me started on hive mind.
Yeah, hive
question for the hive
mind.
mind. Sherman or Tiger, which will give me the best winning army at the club tonight? I'm sorry? A, you're devising an army to be unhistorical so that you win a game, and B, you don't know the difference between a Sherman and a Tiger. Go to the back of the class. And then the other one I saw, which I did write down at the time, and it took me ages to find it last night because I knew it was on a bit of paper somewhere. Hi guys, I want to wargame the Second World War. What should I start with? Well, I'm tempted to say punch in the face, but just for goodness sake, read a book.
Yeah, I saw
historical war games.
I saw that just that first thing that you said there.
Yeah.
I can't remember where I saw it now. It might have been Facebook, but somebody had done an American 1944 Bulge Army for Dolt Action, as it's called, or Bolt Action, or whatever it's called, with a captured King Tiger tank.
Fantastic.
So it's like 20 guys. Snow uniform and a captured King Tiger tank, and you can guarantee that was so it would win.
And do you know, this feeds through into other periods. When I knew Steve Sykes, we played a lot of DBA when we tried to fit a game into a small space. We played a lot of DBA, and one of Steve's biggest bugbears, and absolutely one of mine, is particularly if you went to. Well, there was a Wargames competition every year in Manchester. Was it Northern Military or something like that? It was in Manchester.
Yeah.
And people used to design armies to win in the competition. But you'd end up having a Qing dynasty Chinese army fighting an ancient Britain army. And you think, when did they meet? When was that battle? And that for me just epitomizes the difference between what I would see as good old-fashioned historical wargaming. It doesn't have to be old-fashioned, just proper historical wargaming, compared to a kind of gamesmanship, which are just find daft.
Yeah, it's like Monopoly, isn't it? It's playing a game without any background, and something I've discussed before is that for the likes of you and me, we will have spoken to people who fought in World War II.
Yes.
Some of us will have spoken to people who fought in World War One, and we will have had family members who were involved in the armed forces. And these, although I'm not saying that we're recreating warfare in any way, but we kind of like have a nod to Grandad or whatever when we're doing World War II Desert, and it's not a faction. It's not. There's somebody behind all of these things that you should just tip your hat to, because you'd be talking German.
Well, on a serious point with that, my Uncle Bill, who died 10 years ago, I think 10 years ago, he was at my wedding. My Uncle Bill turned up at the wedding with his Burma Star later on. And I had never before seen that. He was in his 90s by this point. I'd never before seen that. And he never talked to me about the war. And I only learned about his service record from my cousins, his daughters, after he had died. And he'd served throughout the duration. He'd served throughout the entire duration. He'd been machine gunned twice in the Far East. He wouldn't eat rice. He wouldn't buy anything Japanese. He didn't all that. He'd been in Italy. And then he ended up actually doing war damage repair work in places like Coventry when he was on medical recuperation from his machine gun injuries. And he came back up to Dumbarton, where my mum's family were all from, after my grandmother got bombed out 3 times from her home in Dumbarton because they were going for the Dennis shipyard in Dumbarton. And on one occasion, he taught my Uncle Robert, who was younger than him, to put slivers of wood in the cracks of the walls. And he said, that's what we do in Coventry. Saying, if any of those bits of wood jump out the walls, get out of the house immediately. And that kind of service puts into perspective people who don't read history. Because, we owe such a debt. I was thinking recently about the anniversary of the Falklands War, which has been literally just in the last few weeks, and people who served there. And, that was been very, very hazardous, difficult operation in extreme circumstances. Some of those guys, some of the people who put in incredible heroic performances there were astounding, absolutely astounding. And, in many ways, I'm a very liberal person, but I do think we forget the service of our armed forces personnel nowadays, men and women, at our peril.
Yeah, and I'm always saddened when the service is turned against them for political reasons or whatever.
Yeah.
These guys and lasses, they go out and they do their job because they're told to do it, and
and they swear
guys
an oath, Ken. They swear an oath.
Yeah, exactly. I've sworn it myself.
Exactly.
I know. There's a duty to what you do, and whatever you believe of the politics behind whatever they do, you should always come back and look after them because they're doing it.
Absolutely. And there are times when our own country lets our ex-service people down really quite badly. And, that can be really frustrating because if you're going to send people off into danger, you should look after them if they're hurt by it.
Yeah, and support them years and years in advance if something else comes up.
Absolutely.
You should be fully supported.
Absolutely.
So we're total agreement with that, mate.
Yeah.
We're 100% historical games.
Yes.
Like that. Like that. Like that. It drives me nuts as well. That drives me absolutely nuts because we kind of had. We don't have it as much now, but we used to have like rivet counters who were really, really overly obsessive. Right. Does
that get in room 101 then?
Yes. Oh, it certainly does.
Good.
It certainly does, without a shadow of a doubt. In fact, the door wouldn't hit your ass as it closed. It would, that quick. So that just kind of leaves me with the final section of the features, which is the Desert Island war game.
Oh, yes.
And it's just kind of just a chance for you to think of 3 things that you take to a desert island with you, much like the Desert Island discs. But instead of music, we're taking war game related stuff.
Yes.
So is there a desert island game that you would like to take?
Well, it would be my Arnhem terrain, my bespoke Arnhem terrain that I'm getting together at the moment, and all the infantry and kit that goes on it and all the buildings, etc. Arnhem's fascinated me since I was young. I remember I bought, it was a little paperback thing I used to get on quite regularly. It's a little slim floppy paperback publication. I think it was Purnell's Illustrated History of the Second World War, something of that nature. Yeah. And they had an Arnhem special with apparel on the front, and it was just a really good, fascinating thing to read. And I've had a lot of help. This thing about wargaming with people who are kindred spirits and the collegiate nature of it. Colin Romford made me a St. Elizabeth Hospital, and he did it as an MDF laser cut. And he said, I'll just do it as an experiment, Ken, to let me learn how to do this, and I'll send it to you. And then he painted it for me and gave it to me at Partisan. Beautiful, beautiful novel. My friend in Delaware, in North America, Guy DeLilio, he sent me a cardboard version of the museum, which I'm going to have to cut down a bit to fit my table, but again, what a generous thing to do.
Yeah.
I mentioned Alan McCoubrey and Don McHugh earlier, who people I get in touch with on Facebook, never met them face to face. Don designed a resin Oosterbeek building for a house, and Alan painted it, and they both sent it to me as a gift. Just things like that. Colin sold me his spare Arnhem Bridge and Ramp. Only Colin Rumford with a spare.
We call Ramp.
And I'm getting some special, unusual river sections made by Andy Worsley at the Last Valley. In fact, they're in the post me now. One side will be a canal side, the other side, the river sides, for the bridge to go on. So I've had the most tremendous help from people doing this terrain, and I really wouldn't give up on it. So that's what I would take.
No. That is fantastic. And then the second thing is a book. What would be the book that you would take?
Well, I'd still go back. I mean, I did think about this hard. Would I take a military history book? Would I take a Wargames book? But this little advanced Wargames book, my dad got me that
Yes.
for my, I think it was my either my 13th or my 14th birthday, and I absolutely it became my treasure book. I mean, there's all sorts of
Mm.
things in here that are really, really interesting. That I remember there were photographs of people doing Wargames, which are all a bit. You look at the thing, probably a bit stylized now, but there were people doing Waterloo. It's to shirt. There were
Oh,
people
look at
doing,
that.
yeah, look at this.
Oh,
Waterloo. And
crowded round the
yeah,
table.
absolutely.
Oh,
And that was held at the Duke of Wellington's headquarters in London. I seem to remember. I can't read the thing at the moment. But it also provides you with a War Games organisation for a World War II battalion. In this
oh, look
case,
at
the
that.
Perthshire Guards. And it gives you all
Mm.
this. And my mother had a box of chocolates that Christmas that had lots of trays in it and a domed top, like a mini chest. So I used that as my repository for that organisation of the Perthshire Guards with the original Airfix British
Oh,
Infantry, who were kind of weird and pointy and not very well
yes.
defined. So I would take that book because it was a present from my late father. It was my proper introduction to actual war games as opposed to just rolling marbles or firing Britain's guns at toys. And I could almost have quoted some of these chapters by rote.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic book, absolutely, and story as well. And then finally, a war games unit that you'd like to take with you, not necessarily for your game, but just a war games unit that you've maybe coveted or had your eye on for a while, or one that you own that's got a special story.
Well, it's one of my own. And I
Mm.
say it's one of my own. I bought this entire unit from Chris Flowers. For years, I have made the Matchbox Churchill Bridge layer, and I've made other elements of 79th Armored Division. But Chris very kindly let me buy his 79th Armored Division unit, which was the flail tanks, the bridge layers, two different types of bridge layers, the crocodiles, everything you could imagine that would need the tanks with the bundles of sticks they dropped into gaps. Just forgot the name for a minute, it'll come back to me. So they could drop the lumber bundles in the gap and drive over, etc. So they are by far my favourite unit. I had a book all about Percy Hobart, who was the commanding officer, general
Yes, yeah.
commanding of 79th Armored Division, how it was founded, how they trained, how they developed the kit. And bizarrely, my first wife was called Helen Footer, and her father was called Jeff W. Footer, who used to write articles in Military Monthly about World War II camouflage of British Army.
Wow.
Complete coincidence, didn't know that until
Yeah.
many years later. And it also did a lot of blueprint drawings of 79th Armored Division, which actually I donated in the end to the former Museum of Army Transport at Beverley. So goodness knows where they are now. And I've just always been fascinated by 79th Armored Division. And I kind of try and develop games around them. I've got the official regimental history with pull-out maps, and I've often tried to devise games around it, like the attack on the radar station, Dover. They've got the map for that in the book. So that would be my unit, 79th Armored Division, the Funnies. That's it.
Funnies, of course.
Yeah.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic, Ken. Lovely features section there, including my dog trying to eat the builders. Uh, but he's a big lad, and he doesn't like people on his territory. So we'll be back in a moment, ladies, with our big topic. Hopefully, all the builders will still have all the limbs when we do come back. So we are into the final section of the podcast, and this is kind of triggered. I don't want to. I don't know. Want to use the word triggered because somebody will go, "Oh, he's triggered." But this kind of came about from a Facebook post. You won't know this, Ken, but it kind of came about from a Facebook post that you put up not that long ago, a few weeks ago, and it was just it was like, what do you say to somebody who's got cancer? And it was things to say other than "How are you?" And it's something I hadn't really thought about, and my brain will go off on tangents. So when I think or get something like this, I think, yeah, I've not really thought of that, and I thought it was a really nice thing to put on, and it was lovely to see because everything all the stuff that was around this person who was talking was all positive stuff, like it's lovely to see you and things like that. So that kind of triggered me to hope that you would be prepared to talk about this, Ken. And first of all, thank you for doing it, because I think the hobby is so positive that we can, through talking through stuff like this, get a message through to so many other people. So, would you mind, Ken, just telling us kind of your history of illness and the treatment and where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I took a decision right at the point of diagnosis that I was going to share what was going on,
Mm,
because that's kind of the person I am. I like talking with people. I like interacting with people. I'm pretty gregarious. So that was a decision I made, and it's not the decision that everyone made. There's no right way of dealing with this in terms of that. You just work out what works best for you. Some people will stay quite quiet. Somebody like me will shout about it. Yeah, I mean, it all came out really out of the blue. We just moved up to Scotland. We just moved into this house. And you get sent a stick test to test your brain
yes,
to
yeah,
see if
yeah.
you can. And that stick test was invented at Dundee University by a retired professor who lives in the village of Meagle, 2.2 miles from my house. And it's now the global standard test. It's extraordinary. So I had this test, sent it in, and I've done them before, and they all said fine, no problem. Anyway, I got this letter back saying, you better come in and see us. We want to do a colonoscopy. And you think, oh, God, really? Is this absolutely necessary? You've said it's fine before. Anyway, went along, had the colonoscopy, and I was awake for the colonoscopy. I didn't find it uncomfortable in any sense whatsoever. I didn't need any sedation or air or anything like that. Some people do, and again, that's to do with the way you're configured inside. It's just bad luck if you don't enjoy it. I don't know, I enjoyed it. But I could see on the screen what was coming up, and I could see the cancer. It was like a bunch of octopus's tentacles hanging down from a colon. It was not nice. And then he went to the smooth bit, and I said to him, "This isn't good." He said, "No." I said, "To be fair, not everyone who comes to the clinic presents like this." He said, "Oh, it's unusual." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, I think you know it." He said, "But you should wait until we've done biopsies." He said, "But I can give you my gut feeling right now, as you seem to be willing to talk about it." I said, "Yeah, I want to know." He said, "Well, it looks to me like cancer." He said, "In fact, I'd stake my medical reputation on the fact it's cancer." And he said, "It looks to me as though it's locally advanced." He said, "So it's not early stages." So that is a real bombshell. And you go into a kind of, your brain slows down because you're trying to make sense of what's going on. And my wife was waiting for me out in the waiting room. So part of me is thinking, I've got this cancer. And the other part is locally advanced. And the other part is thinking, what do I say to him? Anyway, the nurse came in to see me. She said, "Look, I'm going to take you into a room and have a chat with a co-worker nurse and tell you what happens from here." She said, "I'll go and get your wife." I said, "Look, before my wife comes up, I want to meet her separately to tell her what she's going to be told in this room. I don't want to be told." She said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "I'm going to tell them more." Wonderful NHS, fantastic nurse. By the time my wife got to the room, she was upset, but she knew what was going on. From there on, the NHS, I know people read stories about the NHS is poor at this, that, and the other, and so on. If you've got a problem with oncology, with cancer, it's like being on a roller coaster. And from that point, I had CT scans, MRI scans, a thing called a PET scan, which hunts down cancer in the body using radioactive glucose, because the cancer wants the glucose, so it hurtles to it, and then it's radioactive so that the scan. Within 4 weeks of my diagnosis, 4 weeks, that's right, I had seen all the scanner people, and I'd met the oncologist to review the scans. So not only had I had the scans, they'd got the results. I'd seen the oncologist, and a week after I saw the oncologist, I began radiotherapy. The radiotherapy lasted a week every day, very intense, high dosage, but floors you. And then the week after the radiotherapy, I began chemotherapy, 3 months. Again, this was on a 3-weekly cycle of intravenous and then lots of pills and stuff. And that was, it's not painful, but it does make you feel a bit odd and a bit unusual and slightly nauseous. And they finally found a medicine that worked with me, actually, to stop the feeling, which is wonderful. So once they'd all done that, you then go into a stage of waiting to see how it works, because it works for a long time after you've had the treatment. So I had scans at Christmas. There was no evidence of cancer. It had all gone, which was incredible.
Mm.
Scans the following spring, and there's a tiny thing on the scan. And they said, right, we're going to do another colonoscopy, have a look at this, and if necessary, take a sample, blah, blah, blah. It's cancerous. So I had a minor operation to remove it, which was successful, but they couldn't get it all out.
Mm.
And then you get the big choice, which is don't do anything, wait and see what happens, or get more chemo and radiotherapy and hope it suppresses it again, or have a section of your bowel removed, stone and colostomy bag, and life-changing situation. And the surgeon was fantastic. He said, the only thing I'll say to you is, if we leave it there, or if we treat it with drug therapies, there is a chance of a spread. He said, we should be able to avoid that chance by removing vestiges of it. So a year after my original diagnosis, I had a big operation. It was an 11-hour-long operation, huge operation, in hospital for 3.5 weeks, IV pensive for a week. Came home on 2 walking sticks and learned to walk again and do all the stuff to do again. And I was fine until the following spring, which was 2024, and then it was discovered there was signs of cancer in the liver. They'd already removed 20 lymph nodes by this point as well. So it was signs of 2 tumours in the liver. They treated those again with chemotherapy throughout last year's summer. And then in December, I had an operation in which they did a thing called ablating the tumours, where they put metallic probes into tumours and zapped them with microwave energy. And that got them, because they'd been reduced so much in size by the chemo. But I knew there was a problem with one of the lungs. They'd mentioned that. So I had visits in the spring. Again, they found there were lung tumours too. So I've just completed, as of Friday of this week, 4 weeks of daily radiotherapy for the lung tumours. And we'll find out how that's going at some point in the future. But, the pace of the treatments, the profession of the people, and actually the sheer kindness of the people involved. I've been attending that hospital now for almost 3 years to deal with these cancers. I've not had one bad experience, all the way from a transport driver through a porter, all the way up to the consultants. Not a single bad experience. In fact, one night I was taken down from a ward to get a midnight x-ray done because they were worried about something was going on. And the only x-ray machine at midnight was in the A&E department.
Yeah.
And this porter, when he was taking me on the trolley, I had a nurse with me. Every time he came to a change in floor level, he stopped the trolley, went in front and lifted it over so that it wouldn't disturb my perm. Quite extraordinary kindness. Very touching. So, that's where I am with it. And I'm, as always with cancer patients, you're always waiting the results of the last scan, the next scan. But it's the weirdest thing in the world to say, Ken, but it's been a positive experience in many ways. It really has. And one of the biggest things I discovered was that by discussing what was going on with me on Facebook and Twitter, loads of people jumped out of the woodwork to be supportive. And you talked about that thing I shared, that post I shared, in which you said, people should say things like, I've been missing you, been thinking about you, it's great to see you, those things, rather than what I call the face, which is when you put the head to one side, screw the face up and go, hello. And you just think, well, you think I'm dead, don't you?
Cheers for that.
Let's move on from that. But I mean, the support I've had from the hobby, I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, it's been just immense, absolutely immense.
Yeah. Just before we move on to the hobby, I just wanted to kind of just re-emphasize what you said there about the NHS, because and it happens with my job as well, in that one person does something wrong and the NHS is shit and they don't care and they don't do this and they don't do that and they don't do this. Oh, the police don't care, they don't do this, they're not doing this, that. And they're not. I have seen so many people in my job risk their own lives for people that they don't know, and get no praise for it whatsoever. Some people have even got in trouble for it. And it's the same with the NHS. It's that one idiot or that one nurse who does something wrong, or usually failures in management. It's not it's not the lads and lasses at the front end who you were meeting, who are doing all the tests. They are wonderful, caring people, and I think
Yeah.
you can kind of attest to that from a
Oh,
first-hand point of
I
view.
mean, I really couldn't agree more. And I've met the University of Dundee produces around 500 nurses a year with degrees. And the standard of training of these young people is extraordinary and kind. That's the thing. They are just brimful of kindness. You know, people go on about, oh, young people today, they're entitled, they don't do it. Well, I could line up dozens and dozens and dozens of young people who've been incredibly kind. In fact, I forgot about this until you mentioned about cancer. One of my nurses on the Ward 11 in Nine Wells Hospital after my big operation was called Lewis. And one day I was looking at an iPad screen of some Wargames pictures, and Lewis said, I'll do that. So what do you do? He said, I do ancient Wargame, 28mm. So I live in Long Fogging, do it in my mum and dad's conservatory. I said, you're joking. He said, no. He said, that's my favourite thing to do, to calm down after a day on shift. Lovely guy, big tall guy, big strong guy. That's his thing. His thing is ancient wargaming. He says, just painting up my 28mm figures. I don't want to do small actions. He said, I want to get a decent sized army. Big wargames.
Good lad.
So,
Good lad.
What a great young man. But also these young people, they move heaven and earth to keep you comfortable. I was quite ill a couple of times, and a couple of nurses just grabbed hold of me and kind of hugged me to try and just keep me from moving and hurting myself. I've had doctors who've gone the extra mile big time to help. And that porter I mentioned was exceptional, absolutely exceptional. So are the drivers who've taken me in because I needed transport for the radiotherapy. So we don't have a bus service now, Village, and I can't drive now because of my vision, are ex-police drivers. One of them, lovely guy called Ronnie Marr, has been volunteering as St John's ambulance driver for the radiotherapy unit for 10 years.
Wow.
Retired police officer, been doing that for 10 years.
Top lads. Top
incredible.
Guy.
Superb. And you meet these guys, all the drivers are ex-bus drivers or ex-police, and they all do what you would know as defensive driving. They don't get involved in anything. They wave everybody through, they back off, they keep within the speed limit. They just don't get involved in any nonsense. They look in their left mirror all the time, making sure nobody's going to cause any problems. Fabulous examples of real care, and I've had that throughout the NHS. And I've only got praise for every single aspect of the care I've been given. Only got praise. I take a thing with me to every appointment called Medic Mouse, which is a little toy mouse.
He's on my list. His Medic Mouse is on my list.
Well, he's a little mouse, and he comes along with me because my sister lives down in Hertfordshire. She can't be with me. So he's her little watch guy person to keep an eye on how it goes with me. In the chemotherapy unit, they created PPE for Medic Mouse. They give him blue mitts, a plastic yellow apron, cut off proper PPE. Last week in the radiotherapy, a fabulous young woman called Fiona made you put your head in a vac bag when you get in the radiotherapy to make sure your head and your arms stay in the same place. So you lie in this bag, they remove the air from it, then you will shake. You just put your head in that at the time. She's made a vac bag for Medic Mouse, so he can be photographed on the therapy bed himself. So, these people go the extra mile.
He's a little character, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I'm disappointed when Medic Mouse isn't in the photographs. We need more Medic Mouse. He does a wonderful job. He does a wonderful job.
I'll tell you, I was in one radiotherapy session. I was in one radiotherapy session 2 weeks ago, and one of the young women said, "Well, we've not met before." She said, "My name's Estelle. We've not met before." And I said, "Oh, you must meet Mouse." "No, I remember the Mouse. I saw him a couple of years ago when he came to radiotherapy. I must have met you before." I don't remember me.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. And you mentioned it a few moments ago about this openness that you've decided to do with your cancer. And so how did it come to start sharing stuff on social media, and how did the reaction come back to you?
Yeah, well, when I was first diagnosed, I didn't Google anything. On the advice of my oncology, he said, don't Google it. He said, you'll read every type of crank cure on the planet. He said, we've looked at them. It's our job. He said, we're going to do the best for you using the treatments we've got. I said, absolutely fine, get it. He did tell me that a positive attitude is scientifically proven to help because you produce more endorphins. And he said the endorphins are helping to deal with toxins and problems in your body. He said, so for goodness sake, stay positive. So that was the first thing when I thought about that. Secondly, I did go on Twitter and start reading the stories of other people in the public eye who were dealing with cancer. One of them was Jackie Beltrao, the Sky Sports presenter, who's got stage 4
Oh,
cancer.
the gymnast lady, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, former gymnast. She was at the Olympics when Daley Thompson was in was something like that. And she's a fabulous, positive person. Shares everything she goes through. Frequently posts about, I think she calls scanxiety, anxiety about the scan. So I started following her, and I thought, you know what, this is helping me reading these people's stories. So I should be doing the same for my community, for my sort of diaspora of folk. So I did, and I started sharing it, and I started getting messages back from other people in the hobby and in the military history community. So Bob Caudry, who you
Yes, no, Bob, yeah.
Fabulous wargamer. Bob had been through his own health issues, and I followed him on his blog, Wargaming Miscellaneous, and he started communicating with me through some direct messages on Twitter, and I found them really encouraging and supportive and helpful. And then as I was sharing more about it, some of the historians started sending me books to read when I was getting treatment. So Prit Butter, who's written some great books on the Eastern Front, he's an ex-GP and an ex-army doctor. In fact, during COVID, he was instrumental in setting up a field hospital in Dumfries for COVID patients in Dumfries because of his army experience. He sent me a couple of books with little messages inside them. Al Murray sent me a book. His book on command. Jim Holland sent me a book and signed his book about Brothers in Arms, Sherwood Rangers. And Henry Hyde sent me the campaign. He knew I had the companion, so he sent me these campaigns book. Postman got a hernia delivering it, but nonetheless,
it's a big book.
It's a big book. It's a big book, but it's a lot of reading when you try and get over treatment. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I was getting all this support from people. Then other people, I've mentioned Dawn and Alan McCoobie. Chris Flowers started, apparently accidentally, just putting in a FaceTime video call with me every week and catching up with me every week. And it was always fantastic because it was all about wargaming. He'd check in about how things were going otherwise, briefly, but it was all about wargaming, and it kept me growing. It really kept me saying, what's your next game going to be? What you're planning? So it meant I was planning stuff because I didn't want to say about what we did. So I was going to sit here and think something. So all of that engagement from all these fabulous people just really got me going. And there were some great women historians. There's a lady called Kate Vigurs, Dr. Kate Vigurs, who wrote the book Mission France about the SOE, the women of SOE in France. Another recent PhD, Dr. Victoria Taylor, whose Twitter handle is @SpitfireFee, I think it is. And she is very, very good on the Battle of Britain, really good at debunking some of the myths. And she's reached out a couple of times. Another academic, Maureen Wright, lots of people. Peter Caddick Adams has been an absolute gem. Lots of messages, lots of checking in with me. So I've been surrounded by people giving me their positive thoughts and their positive energy, much in the way that graphic showed. And lots of my close personal friends, Chris Flowers, friends from our side of the hobby, a friend called Marlon and so on, were always in touch, always just giving me something to talk about. Of course, the biggest support throughout this, and the person who's probably had the most to worry about has been Moira, and she's just been like a rock throughout. I'm not sure I could have got through without all the support, and it's meant it reinvigorated my gaming, because I would talk about it on the YouTube channel from time to time, or on Facebook or on Twitter, and you get the most lovely messages from all over the world. And I know they say that these social media channels can be full of unpleasantness and trolls and vitriol. I've only had, I think I'm right in saying, one, possibly two negative things on Twitter. Yeah. Everything else has been incredibly positive. I've been delighted. I mean, I'm not in the public eye, so that probably helps because, you'd behold the radar. But I've had tremendous support. Steve Shan's been very supportive, checking in with me, finding out how things are going. It's been great. And so has Steve Sykes, his widow, Jane Moran. And Steve was a big element in the reenactment world as well, sealed knots and roundheads and that sort of thing. And Jane was big in that as well. So she understands about war games. She knows we're difficult.
So you finding then that this contact and all this positive contact is invigorating you, if you like, into doing things, because I think one of the I obviously haven't got experience with cancer, but I think one of the worst things that people can do is come go into their own shells
Yeah,
and not move off the sofa. And I know it's hard to get off that, but things like this are fantastic to kick
absolutely
you up the
crucial.
kick
Yeah,
you up the arse in
yeah,
a proper
yeah.
Yorkshire way. Kick
That's
him up
right.
arse, get him
Yes,
moving.
that's right. Yeah,
And then once you go in, you've got that momentum, haven't you? And all these people
you
are
absolutely
talking
have.
to. I
And
think it's fantastic.
absolutely. And I'm not going to be critical. I understand that some people, depending on their persona, will retreat a little bit or go into
Hmm.
hiding a little bit. And that may well work for them. But what works for me is this sharing and then this wonderful, positive, friendly, kind feedback. We've got a great hobby, Ken. We know from our years in the hobby and meeting our friends and contacts how lovely they are to deal with. But when one of us is been in a bit of trouble, like I have been with this, the outpouring of support and affection has been mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. And I was walking through Partisan 2 years ago, and a wargamer called Rob Rowell walked up and said, "You are Ken Hanning, and I claim my prize. I recognise you off YouTube." And grabbed hold of me, a guy called Dave Darwin shook my hand, all the best with the trip, Ken, hopes well. Nick Skinner of the Lardies is often in touch. Dropping the odd message, checking in, mainly about positive stuff, though. He's always disappointed by my breakfast because many of them break his rule of two, which is the shoot two of everything on the plate.
Yeah, but he eats avocado.
Oh, he doesn't.
So yeah, don't take any food
Oh,
advice from Nick Skinner because he eats avocado.
I think I
Oh.
think that's possibly a written warning, actually. But no, I mean you can't. And I've had nice. There was one day Don McHugh. I'd asked him a question on about one aspect of a scenario he'd written for Rapid Fire, and he just put in a video call to me while I was sitting at my desk. He said, "Oh, wait, I'll just sort of talk to you about it." We'd never video called before. I've done a
Yeah,
lot of video calls, which I really enjoy doing with people. Guy DeLilio in America has been absolutely brilliant, an absolute stalwart support. And there's times when I've been a bit down and I've thought, right, I'm not going to share stuff today because I'm not in a great place. Guy kind of respects that and just waits until that's gone. Everybody gets it. They're not in your face, but they're very, very helpful. So between Twitter and the YouTube channel and my video calls and Facebook groups and odd video games, it's been great. And the guys in the Killing Your Club have been fantastic as well. Very good.
yeah,
Very giving me lifts to places, all that sort of stuff. So it's
yeah.
for me, the hobby has been my safety net, a sort of warm, comfy, cushioned safety net to get me through all this. It's been incredible, absolutely incredible.
And I always find that when you talk with another wargamer, like we're doing now,
Yes,
is it enthusiasm? It gives you enthusiasm for the
it
hobby, and it
does.
it
It
makes you,
does.
we've spoken today about so many people that we both know, and I'm so
Yes,
glad we've mentioned Steve Sykes because I knew him when I first went to the Leeds club. And we've talked about him, we've remembered him today, and
yes,
I think that's a
yeah.
wonderful thing. And
Oh, I do. I mean, I
I,
miss Steve. I miss Steve to this
yeah,
day.
yeah. And I'm enthused for my next wargaming project as a result of talking to you. And it happened, this is why I do the podcast. I could do this and not put it out,
Yeah.
and still it would be a positive thing for me. So it's wonderful to hear that so many people are supportive of you and are in touch. And you've got a blog as well, haven't you? The Big Wargames blog.
Well, yeah, it's not really a blog. It's just a website. Most of my work is done on Twitter and Facebook, in the various groups, and my YouTube channel. And then, but people can get in touch with me. But they're all called Big War Games. BigWarGames.com is the website, and Big War Games is the YouTube channel. I'm happy to speak to people in any way they get in touch with me, and I'm obviously particularly um, keen on any other wargamers or historians who are going through something similar. I've had a lot of contact on that front. I'm not going to name any names here because not all of it's in the public domain, but I've had really lovely messages from people, particularly fellow wargamers who are on their way to a chemo session or whatever. I don't know, just check in just for a wee
Yeah.
online chat or whatever. And I find that really good because people have done that for me, and I feel as though I should also be doing that with them because we're all in different stages of different journeys, and no two cancers are the same, but a lot of the feelings you get are quite similar. And a lot of the ways of combating them, I think, are quite similar as well.
Oh, it's lovely to hear, but there's like a little sort of support group within the
Yeah.
wargaming the hobby as we go through it. And you mentioned, and it's something that you come back to quite a lot on your social media as well.
Yep.
And I do hasten to add to talk about other podcasts on this podcast. But I think that we said that Wargame Soldiers and Strategy was the second best podcast. No, Oddcast was the second best
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
So the third best podcast in the country is We Have Ways, and just because they've got more
Yes.
listeners, just because
Yes.
they've got, I'm just talking to the audience now. Just because they've got more listeners than me doesn't mean it's any better. Just remember that. So, what is it? What is it about? And I listen to it as well.
Yeah.
What is it for you, Ken, about the We Have Ways podcast that kind of grips you?
Do you know the first time I listened to it, I was quite skeptical. But someone had mentioned to me, one of my old friends had mentioned to me, "Look, you really enjoy this. It's really good." So I signed up for it on Patreon and listened to it whenever my first episode was a few years ago. And it was Al Murray and James Holland on a split screen doing what you could only describe, and they would describe as war waffle. They were just talking about stuff. They were meant to be talking about a particular topic. It took them half an hour to get to the topic. They then discuss the topic. They then answer some questions that come up on the sidebar, which they call the sidebar of shame. And everyone who goes on the live stream is known as members of the independent company.
Yes.
And you have a number based on when you joined. Mine's 1,000 and something. And there are people on that live stream who form little mini communities. So there's like the Dorset Independent Company, or the Highland Independent Company, or the Northeast, or the Lancashire. Sorry. There are people down there who do understand about history. Although I've only met both of them.
Yes.
So yes. And it was on a passing train. But nonetheless, all these people are, again, hugely supportive. And there are, it's kind of invidious to mention names, but there's a guy in the village here, David Kerr, who's a fellow. We've got 200 people in the village, and another member of the We Have Ways independent company in the village. Unbelievable. It's just around the corner.
Yeah.
Retired police officer as well.
Excellent.
Yes, my next door neighbour's a retired police officer as well, actually.
Whether there's any of us left working.
Surrounded by, in fact, I think they were planted to keep me under control. But there are guys on the We Have Ways pod. Al and James have created a safe, friendly, positive, encouraging environment for historians, people interested in history, and some wargamers and some modelers to get together and have a lovely time. It's just a lovely time. It's just a lovely, the live stream is a lovely, you get this sort of glass of wine, you put it on, and you sit back and you feel the warmth of kindred spirits. I mentioned wargamers who are kindred spirits. Well, these people are our extended kindred spirits.
Yeah.
There's just the most hilarious group of people there. There's a guy I've met through the live stream called Kevin Getz. He's a state trooper in, I think it's Indiana, correct me if I'm wrong. And he's fascinated by the British Glider Pilot Regiment and the Horsa Glider. Absolutely a source of incredible knowledge on it. And he and I will chat about these things. And he sent me some of his state trooper little sort of insignia badges as a memento through the post to say, keep these, Ken, I'm thinking of you. That thing I'm thinking of. There's another guy called Dominic Suave. Dom is a big cricket fan, and what a day for you and I have been talking after a superb run chase at Edinburgh. And Dom's another of these supported people. They all, I'm not going to name anymore because I'll forget people and I'll hate myself for doing that. But they all form a sort of, almost like a knitted pattern of friendliness and kindness and things to talk about that we all understand. We don't even call it WW2, World War II. We call it SWW, the Second World War, because we're British. Although that said, Al and James have created a new YouTube home for all of their stuff, Walking the Ground and various talks, which they call WW2 Headquarters. I need to pick that up with that, James. Can you shoot me SWW? Come back to that. But yes, it's been a wonderful community, and it's helped a lot of people. Lots
Yeah.
and lots of people. A lot of ex-service people on there who've had a lot to get through. You'll know what I'm talking about, PTSD and all that kind of stuff. A great place for new historians to get an audience and find people who buy their books and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I'm slightly suspicious that Alan James set up as a kind of book selling venture with a live stream as a kind of an
Yeah,
offshoot.
attached. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's I would encourage people to listen to it. It's called We Have Ways of Making You Talk. It's owned in the Goal Hanger suite, which is the Gary Lineker suite of podcasts, which also has the rest is football and that kind of stuff. And it's called Goal Hanger because that was Lineker's name as a forward, because that's how he got his goals. And those who support Leeds United can get behind that. Me and Alan Clark, with Sniffer Clark. Sniffer Clark. So yeah, it's been a great community, and it's an extension of the Wargames historical community, but in a more chatty way. And there's loads of waffle on. I mean, there's all kinds of discussion about, what were the best tanks in the Second World War, what were the best aircraft. Obviously, the best tank was clearly the Churchill, because of its name and because of its inability to be destroyed. Other people argue differently. They come up with all sorts of ludicrous suggestions, such as Tigers, T-34s and things like that. And again, the best aircraft in the world, best aircraft in the Second World War was clearly, I mean, unarguably, the Western Whirlwind. And anyone who disagrees with that is a fool. So, that you discover all these brilliant concepts on that live stream. So it's a great supportive and wonderful group of people to be part of.
Yeah, and I think there is that element of humour with those guys,
Yes.
and they're both present people who present stuff. They're both outgoing, and a lot of the history when I look back to sorry Alex, Michael Wood, he was the one who I absolutely loved because of the way that he, I'll never forget him.
Yes.
He was on that prow of the ship and he throws his spear into the water and he said, "This is Alexander did this this spot
right here. Yeah,
this is Hellespont," and he's jumping up and down pretending to be a silver shield on this on this wall in a village in Perthshire. And it was just, that's what grips me, that's what excites me, rather than the very, very dry history that can sometimes be presented. And that's what I love about We Have Ways. The rest is history is very similar. In that it has that element of entertainment.
Yes, definitely. It's not a dry experience. And I think the final thing, to give you an example of how it works in practice, we went last February to see Al Murray doing his pub landlord show in a theatre in Dundee. And beforehand, we met Maura's brother and his wife, my in-laws, and their son, Callum, my youngest nephew. And we went to a tapas restaurant in Dundee. As we walked in the door of the tapas restaurant, my phone pinged. There was a direct message on Twitter from Al Murray. He said, "Hi Ken, saw you got tickets for tonight, saw you put them up on Facebook on Twitter last week. Popped down to the stage door at half-time to say hello."
Oh, wow.
The show was fantastic. Callum, my nephew, wasn't sure if he'd like it. By half-time, he was besotted with it. So I said, "Do you want to come and meet Al?" He said, "I absolutely want to come and meet Al." We went down, we had 10 minutes with Al, the only people in the room, just with him. What a generous and kind thing to do.
Some lovely people out there, mate. There's some really, really lovely people out there. So your YouTube channel, there's some big hitters on there, mate. I think is it the Arnhem one that's gone?
The other one's got, I can't remember now what it is. It's 16,000 views or something. I know it's. I'm not quite sure why it's happened the way it's happened. I'm really not. One of my wargaming friends, who will remain anonymous because I don't want him back, he said, "Just think of setting up a YouTube channel. How does he make it a success?" And I have no idea. I don't know. I've no idea. There isn't a formula. All the videos are different. Some of them about how you formulate a unit. Some are about my favourite Wargames books. Some are about big games. And I don't know what the secret is.
Yeah. Because you don't post regular, do you?
No,
there's a gap. There's a gap between.
There's a gap. That's mainly, unfortunately, been treatment based. I'm hoping to get back to more regular posting. But to be honest, the other thing is, Ken, I only post when I think I've got something to say that's interesting. I know they say if you want to build up a successful YouTube channel, you have to post every Friday at 3 o'clock or every Thursday.
Yeah,
Do it.
that was the point I was making.
Yeah,
Everyone says, "Oh, you need to post every
yeah,
week, same time, and people know you come in." But like some of yours have just gone on a
yeah,
life of their own.
yeah. People have just obviously done a Google search on an RMM Wargame. I mean, if you do Google searches of some of my videos, they're right up on the top of the page. And I have no idea how that happens. Absolutely not.
So you're not going to be one of these social media influencers
No,
then who
Ken,
charges people thousands.
I can't influence my wife, let alone anybody who's a stranger.
Hey, don't say that. You managed to get a Wargames shed.
That's true. That's a very good point. Good point, well delivered.
which is what we like to see. We've spoken about individuals throughout the course of the video, but people like Colin Rumford from Rapid Fire have been big supporters of you, and you've done lots of really instructive videos about the rules for Rapid Fire. So kind of what's the rapid fire thing for you? Why do you go to what rapid fire as a set of rules?
Um, Familiarity is the easiest answer, I suppose. But if I go back to 1994, when the first rulebook came out, I can remember seeing the rulebook at one of the shows and looking at it. And I think it might have been a Duncan stand. I don't think there was a rapid fire stand at that point. It probably lived to be because it didn't exist. But I think it was on Duncan stand. And I was looking at it, oh God, this is full of colour pictures and scenarios. And the clever trick Colin and Richard did in that first book was they put all the scenarios in it. So you could do an Operation Torch scenario in Safi, which I've done recently in my Wargame. I want to do that all my life. There was a great scenario from the BEF, the battle at Hondegheim, when Germans attacked a retiring British artillery outfit in the middle of a town. There's the defeat of the assault on Hong Kong. There's lots. They're very keen on early war at that time. So there was like an East African, no, it's not an East African, attack on a fort by British versus Italians in North Africa. And I remember one of the first demonstration games I saw Colin do at a show was an East African port with a big hill, and they were going up this hill, being shot at by Germans coming down the hill, or towns over. And the visual was just amazing. And later on, he went to do Wake Island and all sorts of things. It was just phenomenal to see. So for me, the visual thing was big, but also, and it reminded me of the Don Featherstone organizational chart, you could get big scale actions with lots of troops on the table for modern wargaming, for World War II wargaming. So this idea of brigades, so you could do like the self-contained, self-sufficient modern army unit of a brigade with its brigade support elements, the artillery and the anti-tank and all that sort of stuff, and the three battalions. Now, Chris Flowers has taken that to another level. He'll stick a division of rapid fire stuff on the table just because he can.
That's what I love about. That's what I love about Chris. There's no mucking about. Just get it on the table.
He just, people. I mean, I'm a big believer in the scenarios the guys do. And the guys, I mean, one of the reasons rapid fire has been so successful is they produce so many great scenarios, and that's being enhanced now by people like Mark Piper down under and Don doing the scenarios. People putting these scenarios together for different parts, so it's making your armies more usable. But the idea of lots of brigades running at each other with all the rank support is fun. And we take enormous compromises in wargaming. We're firing a tank and suggesting it can't fire all the way along a 20-foot table. And of course, it would fire into the 3 houses down the road. My escort carrier for my Safi landings is about 2 feet long. In real terms, it needs to be about 33 feet long to be a proper 1/72 scale carrier. But, you make these compromises for the visual thing. Your houses are proper 1/72 scale houses, or they'd look too big and squashed. Your trees are proper 1/76 scale. Your figures would look too small because trees are bloody huge. So you make all these compromises, but like my Pegasus Prince game, these kind of things, that gets a lot of attention because they're totemic battles from the Second War, big, exciting actions. And so rapid fire for me was a way of being able to do that on a tape. And I've played other rules perfectly happily. I've played Crossfire, Battle Group. I've played Chain of Command. And I've enjoyed aspects of all of them, smaller tables, had a great time. My go-to is the big game, so I want a set of rules that allow me to instruct a big army what to do. But if I go to the club and somebody's got chain of command, I'll happily jump onto that and get cracking with it because they're very playable rules, good fun. If you want to see a platoon or platoon action arguing over a farm, there's a lot of thinking to do in that battle. It's a really tough thing to do. So I'm not a rules zealot in that sense. I'll try rules. I'll try every set of rules once to see what there are some I can't get my head around. I don't write. There's a famous set of rules where if you roll a 666, you've got a blunder.
Yes,
that just drives me potty. I just don't see the point of having that.
There are some rules, aren't there, Ken, where we're both intelligent people, but there are some rules that you just read and read and read and read and read and read again, and you just don't get.
No.
There's a set of rules that I was after for ages called Shattered Lances for the Crusades, because I'm a big Crusades fan, but I've never really settled on a set of rules, and I honestly don't understand what they're going on about. I've read through it like 5 or 6 times, and it's like I just don't understand this.
Yeah.
It's maybe as I get older, I'm more of a doer learner than a reader learner.
Yeah.
So if somebody sat down and played a game with me, I might get it. But by reading the rules, I'm just like no idea what's going on whatsoever, which is probably not a good sign for me.
No, I get that, and I've had a lot of feedback on the YouTube channel. People want me to do more explain type videos, which tell people how to do this, how to do that with the rules. So what I'm going to do, once I get the Arnhem terrain set up in the bespoke form, I'll do a video of why everything's where it is and the compromises and how I've done it. And then I'm going to use Rapid Fire Reloaded to play out different segments of battle in a kind of turn-by-turn way, because that seems to be what people are asking for, and it's something I'd really like to do. But I always hesitate to criticize anyone who's involved in trade and hobby, because we need them. We just need them. When I started out Wargame, you were the same. We used to wait for military blocking to tell us how to turn the Airfix emergency recovery set into some transport vehicles or whatever it might be. You're always looking how to extend the Airfix fort into something more useful. I've got all the Airfix forts. I've got the Roman fort, the Robin Hood Sherwood Forest fort, the Sheriff of Nottingham fort, the Fort Sahara for Holy Wars, and I've got the Fort Sahara for the North Africa, and Fort is that Apache for the anyway, all those Airfix forts, and I'm not really sure why I've got them. I think it's because I couldn't afford them when I was young.
Yeah. I've got them now. I've got a full set.
Absolutely.
I've got a full set. I'm keeping them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's lovely to hear. And we're kind of drawing towards the end of the show now. So, what are your wargaming plans at the moment? Are you concentrating on this Arnhem table?
Concentrating on Arnhem at the moment. I've got just going to reach over and see if I can get something without knocking lots of things off my table, which will then cause domestic vexation. So I'm working a lot of things at the moment. The Arnhem table is the current project, but I always have lots of projects. So Arnhem's the current project. I'm also devising a set of rules to refight Mission France. This is Kate Vigor's book about the SOE. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on the SOE involvement with things like the Normandy landings, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that I can have a big game element with funny little bits going on just behind the enemy lines, that kind of thing. So there were lots of groups in the Second World War deployed by the British to operate a small units, the SAS, obviously. Everybody knows about North Africa, but of course they were very busy in Belgium, and that was a pretty horrible place for them to be, and very tough. There was a lot of atrocities committed against them by one particular SS commander. There was also the I can't remember the name now. There was a 3-man team, sets of 3-man teams, which are named after somewhere in the northeast of England. Jebra teams. Jebras, and they were an officer, a radio operator, and a local person, and they were dropped in to do various support roles with resistance around Europe. That obviously was SME themselves. And then there was the commando raids. I've got a Dieppe game in brewing as well. I've been putting together the right coloured Canadian tanks for the Dieppe game, and I'm just trying to work out how I'll do the terrain for that, because it's quite important for that battle. I noticed on my last visit to Chris's house the night before he drove me down to Partisan, he's got a Churchill bobbin. I didn't know you could get a Churchill bobbin, and he's got one. In fact, I may be right in saying he's got two. So I need to find out. I think it was a 3D print, I think he said, from something that he put out. So I need to get a Churchill bobbin. Well, I think it's a slightly different name at Dieppe. It was an earlier version, but it's a thing. It's like a big roll of material on a big thing out the front of the tank. They just roll it down to be like a carpet for the tanks to roll over. It's wholly unsuccessful at Dieppe. I think I'm certain I'm right in saying no tanks got off the beach.
Yeah, you need them. It's a weird beach, Dieppe. I've been there, and it's a bit steep and shingly, and it's a bit of a strange thing.
Surrounded by cliffs offering enfilading fire opportunities.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
No, and again, I did a big Omaha game. I really enjoyed that. Colin is currently writing a new Omaha guide, and he again kind of sent me some PDFs of his new organizational bits for Omaha, so I could do my game. People do that sort of thing all the time. People just give me advanced sight of. I mean, Colin sent me PDFs of rapid fire reloaded rules before they came out. So all of these bits of help are really, really good. So I've got lots of projects on the go. I just need to make sure I get them all done.
Yeah, get focused,
yes,
and get them sorted.
Good, sorry,
is it all World War II, Ken, or have you? Looked...
I've got some ancient 15mm that I used to play with Steve. And I've been started when it was actually during the radiotherapy sessions. I've started planning out a way of getting them into a bigger game than Steve would use, because I've got quite a few of them. I've done a lot of ACW over the years, and I'm 67 years old. I keep saying to myself, I got rid of my 15mm ACW stuff, and I keep saying to myself, I don't need to open up a new period. I need to focus more on the period I've got. But there's always another period.
It's not you're not going to escape it. Just give in.
I know.
Just give in. It's the way forward.
Think Chris Flower's motto up until now, I think, has always been: "There's always another period. There's always another scale." Although his scale has always been huge, big troops. I wouldn't go back to 15mm for anything now, just because of my eyesight. But I've seen some very, very attractive 28mm ACW stuff. They do sort of think, oh, crikey. And in fact, interestingly, one of my chums in the Kirriemuir Club, Jed Harbridge Rose, who's a former squaddy, he's part of the Lucas Veterans, he also comes up to Kirriemuir. He's just been selling some ECW 28mm buildings and figures. Well, I think so on the 30 Years' War as well. So I did think about that.
We were just talking there about your future Wargames projects, which is lovely to see. And you come down to Partisan last couple of times. Any shows you're planning to go to this year?
I'm hoping to get to Claymore, which is the biggest show in Scotland. It's held in Edinburgh. The logistics are a bit tricky because I can't drive, but Maura has kindly agreed to drop me at Dundee railway station. And there's a very convenient bus that can get me out to the Claymore venue. And I've been to Claymore a few times. It's a really nice, show, actually. It is good. I've never been to the Falkirk show, which I think is the second largest show in Scotland. And
a lot of people are saying positive things about that Falkirk show, and I've
heard that
it's one of those where I'd need to be on holiday in the area.
Yes,
and Mrs. Riley will attest that we have. It's purely coincidence, Ken. I'm not saying that, but accidentally we tend to go on holiday in an area where there's a big Wargame show at the same time that it's on. We've been to Edinburgh when Claymore's on, and I just don't know how it happens. We're just sat there in our hotel, or cottage, and I'll go, oh look, it's Claymore this weekend. How did that happen?
It's serendipity. That happens to me with museums I want to visit. Which is great. And obviously our club, Kirriemuir, holds a lovely little show called Targe.
Oh, yeah.
And it's now held in our place where we meet at the club, which is the Guide Halls in Kirringham,
Mm.
we only allow 6-foot tables in it because the venue is tiny.
Yeah.
But we pack a lot of people in. It's a very
Mm.
popular show, a very friendly show. Dave Thomas comes up
Dave
with his
Thomas,
his
yeah,
kit.
I saw
Yeah,
that.
he comes up. He's the only trader that comes, but that's the only trader you need because he fills half the room.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely wonderful to see.
So yeah, but getting to shows is more difficult because again, the other problem about not having a car is you limit how much you can buy.
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
deeply
that's
disappointing.
that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I tend to take a trailer to shows these days, but there we are. That's another story.
Yes. Yes.
After 3 and a bit hours of questioning you,
God.
Ken, I always give my guests an opportunity to ask me a question at the end of the show, just to be polite. So, have you got anything, or have I escaped?
You haven't escaped because there is something that does intrigue me.
Yeah.
Which is that you always ask people about the niggles in the hobby and the bugbears and that sort of stuff. What is your favourite aspect of wargaming?
Friendship. I've got to say friendship. The guys that I used to game with back in Northwich, when I was a teenager, I'm only really in contact with Steve Barker now, but I'm pretty sure that if we got in, and I occasionally see some of them at shows, but you just Simon Weinberger as well. He's another good friend of mine who I'm still in contact with. You just click straight away because you're good old
Yeah.
mates and you've got really loads of stories to tell about
Yeah.
things. And all the lads at the Leeds Wargames Club, who I have been there since 1988, so it's coming up 40 years that I've known these people.
Yeah.
And I just think harking back to this conversation that we've just had about the support that the hobby gives you, the friendship that it gives you is exactly the same, and it's a fantastic thing, and we're lucky to have it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic answer.
Yeah. Even though I annoy a lot of people with some of the stuff that I say, it's all in jest, and most people get it, and you can always tell when somebody new comes on the Facebook or the podcast. It's like you've missed the point here, haven't you?
Yes,
it's points over there somewhere, and you've just fucking missed it. Well, I just want to say, Ken, it's been an absolute joy today. Getting to know you a little bit better, having a really nice conversation about wargaming. We've talked about some difficult topics, but I think that there's positivity in there. Is certainly the way that you're approaching it, and it's just been an absolute joy, mate. So thank you very much for your time today.
Well, me too. That's been I can't believe it's 3 hours. That's ridiculous. That's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation with another wargaming kindred spirit, which is my favourite kind of wargame. So thank you, and thanks to the other podcasts because I just love listening to them when I'm getting up to stuff out in the war room. You need a good, enjoyable backdrop.
And some podcasts are better than others.
I've been told that many times by you yourself, and I suspect, given that this is from Yorkshire, I imagine that this is probably the best.
I couldn't possibly comment on the award-winning podcast that you are currently taking part of. But
fantastic!
It's been a joy, mate. Say good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Ken. What a great guy. And I think it shows, as I said at the start, how positive our hobby can be to help people. Things like we were talking about pottering around a war games room and just reorganizing things. When you look at treatments like CBT and stuff like that, that is what it is. It's a fantastic thing. You concentrate, stress relief with painting, all those sorts of things, and the joy and the pleasure it's brought to Ken in what have been some really difficult times for him has been absolutely amazing. And I'd just like to thank all those people who've treated him so amazingly. From me, I just think it's fantastic what you've done. So thank you, and thank you, Ken, for spending the time with me. It was a bit difficult, both of us being called Ken, but we kept away from the first names, and we did all right. So the next issue or episode 76 Should be the questions from the brews in the Vineyard. I'm just waiting for Alex to confirm when he's available, but that should be the next one. And then I've got a bit of a 3 or 4 episodes. I'm just juggling to get them one or the other. One involves a trip over to the coast, so I need to get all that organised. But the next one should be brews in the Vineyard, and then we'll have a run of 4. Then probably a listener episode, another phone in, and then I'll start planning in the run in or the run up to Christmas. So thanks again for listening. Please, if you get a chance, leave a comment somewhere on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Podbean, wherever you follow it, and subscribe. It makes a massive difference to the algorithms that these podcast suppliers use to put the podcast at the start of when somebody types in Wargaming or whatever. And I just love more people to listen to it. You know what you're in for. So why should you suffer and nobody else does? So until next time, silly.